Chapter 1259. Sitting cross-legged on the peak of the three-world mountain, Yi Chen did not move at all and entered the deepest level of meditation. The sovereign's inheritance was determined by the person. Some people could only obtain a part of the essence of the martial arts, while others could obtain most of it. Normally, the higher the comprehension, the higher the degree of completeness of the inheritance. Of course, there was another situation, where the inheritor's martial arts were very similar to the inheritor's martial arts, or even the same. In this case, the inheritor might be able to receive the complete inheritance. The sovereign of the three worlds' martial arts were naturally different from Yi Chen's, but what Yi Chen wanted was not the complete inheritance of the sovereign of the three worlds' martial arts, but the other's understanding of martial arts. At Yi Chen's level, bitter training was no longer of much use. Sometimes, a single comprehension might be equivalent to thousands of years of bitter training. Heaven realm killing fist. Earth realm killing fist. Mortal realm killing fist. In his mind, the three fist techniques of the sovereign of the three worlds martial arts kept replaying. Yi Chen had already comprehended the heaven realm killing fist, otherwise, he would not have passed the heaven realm so easily. However, Yi Chen also knew that it was far from enough. The heaven realm killing fist could be strong or weak. When it was strong, it was even stronger than the mortal realm killing fist. His comprehension was not worth mentioning at all. To comprehend the essence of the three worlds killing fist, he had to start from the heaven realm killing fist, because the heaven realm killing fist focused on cultivating the heart. If the heart was not strong enough, he would not be able to control the three worlds killing fist. The sovereign level should require enough heart strength to cross over. For no reason, such a thought flashed in Yi Chen's mind. In the past, Yi Chen thought that training the heart was training the will, and a strong heart meant a strong will. But now, Yi Chen did not think so. The heart was something on a deeper level. It was illusory, even more ethereal than the soul. A strong soul and a strong will did not mean that one would have a bright future, but a strong heart would at least mean that there would be hope. Once a life had thoughts, it would actually have dreams and aspirations. If a talented person did not have a competitive heart, then his future would definitely be limited. The bigger the heart, the bigger the future. If one's heart was limitless, their future would be limitless. After figuring this out, Yi Chen's body underwent a drastic change. At this moment, Yi Chen was still the same Yi Chen, but in front of him, a door had opened up. Once he stepped through the door, he would be able to reach the highest point of his life. Time passed like water. On the three-world mountain, Yi Chen had been sitting there with his legs crossed without moving. However, if anyone had been present, they would have noticed that the area around Yi Chen was being refracted. These refractions weren't simple refractions, such as light rays, but rather, the refractions of one's heart. Gradually, the refractions grew stronger and stronger, until sword techniques began to appear. Some of these sword techniques were strong, and some were weak. The weaker ones were comparable to ordinary sword techniques, while the stronger ones were comparable to paragons. The heart could change. In other words, the strength of the heart would fluctuate. When the fluctuations were low, the strength would naturally be the weakest. When the fluctuations were high, the strength would be unimaginable. The power of the heaven realm killing fist was that it could maintain the fluctuation of one's heart at a relatively high level, raising it to its peak. As for how much one could raise it, it depended on how far one could walk in the realm of one's heart. Bang! Suddenly, a corner of three-world mountain was chopped off. In the next moment, it instantly recovered, as if it was just an illusion. All things are empty. Whether it's real or fake, it's not important. What's important is whether it's what one thinks in one's heart. Slowly, Yi Chen stood up. In terms of cultivation base, Yi Chen hadn't improved in the slightest. However, the current Yi Chen was countless times more dangerous than the Yi Chen of the past. Although he was standing there, he seemed to be separated by countless different spaces, separating dream and reality, real and fake. It was truly hard to distinguish what was real and what was fake. At this moment, Yi Chen had reached the highest realm of Sword Dao, Heart Sword Realm. Sword Dao Realm, from the lowest sword in the hand to the sword in the heart, each step was extremely difficult. Of course, at the 8th layer of life and death realm, almost everyone had reached this realm. Even if they were strong, they would not be that strong. It would not be easy to defeat others just because one's sword Dao realm was slightly higher. There were too many factors influencing one's strength, and sword Dao realm was only one of them. However, Heart Sword was different. It was the highest realm of sword Dao, a realm that even supremes might not be able to easily grasp. Heart Sword was no longer attached to reality or illusion, true or false. To a certain extent, it had already transcended the heavenly Dao and was on par with it. What Yi Chen didn't know was that the strength of one's heart was actually the key to becoming a true god. Only the heart could transcend the heavenly Dao and not be bound by it. Of course, Yi Chen had only just entered Heart Sword realm, which was not enough to be on par with the heavenly Dao. Even the supremes of the 3 realms couldn't challenge the heavenly Dao. If they could, then he would be a true god. The stronger the heart, the stronger the sword art. Taking out his flying sword, Yi Chen performed his 5-element sword art in a standard manner. Buzz buzz buzz. Sword light spread out, gradually distorting the rules of the 3-world mountain. However, since the 3-world mountain was formed by the supremes of the 3 realms, the power of the heart was even more powerful. Thus, the 5-element sword arts could only slightly distort the rules. If it were in the outside world, the 5-element sword arts containing the power of the heart would be frightening and could easily distort the rules. 5 elements cut. Sucking in a deep breath, Yi Chen suddenly used the 5 elements cut. A 5-colored sword light crazily slashed out. For a moment, lightning and thunder rumbled on the 3-world mountain, and space-time shattered. It was as if the primal chaos had transformed into stars. I didn't expect you to comprehend the power of the heart so quickly. You are indeed a promising talent. The middle-aged man's figure appeared and faintly nodded. After the sword attack, the sword aura on Yi Chen's body was like a deflated balloon. It immediately withered. After all, he had just entered the Heart Sword realm, and the power of the heart was still unstable. No wonder the heavens' will-capturing hand is so unpredictable. It must contain a powerful heart force. Using one's heart to replace the heart of the heavens, it is naturally omnipotent. However, compared to the 3-world killing fist, it is probably much weaker. It's just that I have never seen the real 3-world killing fist. Yi Chen knew very well that the 3-world killing fist was very dangerous. It was fine when it was not used, but once it was used, it would kill. The fist energy of the fist art had already transformed into an eternal killing intent. For the heaven killing fist, Yi Chen had already learned it. He had even comprehended the highest realm of the sword Dao, the Heart Sword. Next, it was the earth killing fist and the human killing fist. The earth killing fist was the extreme of power. First, one had to understand the existence of power, then turn the power of heaven and earth into one's own power to attack the enemy. The first step should be to comprehend the profound of power. Only then can I get twice the result with half the effort. Generally speaking, the profound of time and the profound of space were the highest profounds. However, in front of the profound of power, the profound of time and the profound of space were not as good. The flow of time contained power, and the maintenance of space also contained power. Power could be said to be everywhere. It was the link between heaven and earth. Power was everywhere, so it was even harder to comprehend. If one could comprehend the profound of power, they might be able to comprehend the profound of time. There was a necessary connection between the two. Chapter 1260. Although the power profound was not inferior to the time profound and space profound, it was still quite easy to comprehend in the early stages. Especially after obtaining the essence of the Earth Realm Killing Fist, Yi Chen didn't need to accumulate a lot of the original foundation, and directly pushed the power profound to 70% completion. Currently, when he used the same sword arts, its might would be much higher than before. Each move and style would be the pinnacle of his own power. When the profound of strength reached 90%, the understanding of the profound of strength in Yi Chen's mind was completely exhausted. For any profound, after 90%, it would be a forbidden area. This was especially true for the profound of strength. It could be said that after 90%, The profound of strength was the true essence of the profound. The others were still external. Regarding the profound of strength, one had to truly comprehend it. There were no shortcuts. If one didn't know, then they didn't know. This wasn't like the heart sword, so Yi Chen immediately stopped comprehending the profound of strength. However, the profound of strength at 90% already made Yi Chen very satisfied. What made him even more surprised was that the appearance of the profound of strength had allowed the profound of time to be born from the profound of space. Currently, the profound of time was still very low, and its progress was also very slow. However, it had already reached 20%. Although the profound of strength was better than the profound of time, in terms of difficulty, the profound of time was harder to comprehend. There were several reasons for this. First, after comprehending the profound of space, the difficulty of comprehending the profound of time would increase by 10 times. This was different from metal, wood, water, fire, earth, light and darkness, and even yin and yang. Once the profound of space and time were combined, even if it didn't create a proper profound of time and space, it would still be very abnormal and could even produce unexpected changes. Time and space were the framework of a world. It was clearer and brighter, so it was easier to produce a terrifying chain reaction. As for metal, wood, water, fire, earth, light and darkness, and yin and yang, they needed to combine and evolve in order to burst out a power that was not inferior to that of time and space. As for the esoteric of strength, it was independent, but it wasn't. It was said to be independent because it didn't have any esoteric that could be combined with it. Therefore, in a one-on-one battle, it was the strongest. However, compared to the spacetime esoteric, the five elements esoteric, and the yin-yang esoteric, it was much weaker. It wasn't independent because the esoteric of strength could be used in any aspect. It could also be combined with the spacetime esoteric. For example, the three realms killing fist contained the yin-yang esoteric and the esoteric of strength. Becoming a true god wasn't easy. Even becoming a demigod was as difficult as ascending to the heavens. Even if one didn't know everything, they had to be able to evolve everything they knew to the limit. When the esoteric of time reached 20%, the power of the momentary brilliance increased by thousands of times. When the sword slashed out, a dense sword net of death enveloped time and space, slicing through everything. If it was said to be similar to spacetime slicing in the past, then now it was a real spacetime slicing. Its power wasn't inferior to the five elements sword technique at all. It was only slightly inferior to the ultimate move of the five elements sword technique, the five element slash. It sounded a little exaggerated. After all, the esoteric of time was only 20%, while the five elements sword technique contained 5 kinds of esoteric to perfection. However, the spacetime esoteric was very clear and could naturally make up for each other's flaws, causing a terrifying chain reaction. On the other hand, the five elements sword technique seemed to contain 5 kinds of esoteric to perfection, but Yi Chen had no way to continue increasing their power in a short period of time. It could be said that the momentary brilliance had dug out the potential of the spacetime esoteric, while the five elements sword technique had only dug out the surface of the five elements esoteric. The two couldn't be compared. This was also why the esoteric of time was so difficult to comprehend. However, the current momentary brilliance was no longer suitable to be called momentary brilliance. After adding the esoteric of time, the nature of the sword technique had the attribute of cutting through everything. Let's call it the cut of death. In terms of profoundness, the cut of death was not as strong as the five elements sword technique. In terms of destructive power, the cut of death was not as strong as the slash of five elements. However, the terrifying thing about the cut of death was that it was extremely difficult to dodge. It almost cut off any escape route for the enemy. In front of the cut of death, time and space were just a relatively large piece of cheese. And the enemy would be trapped in time and space no matter what, unless their realm far surpassed Yi Chen's. Now that the esoteric of power had reached 90% completion, the next step was to analyze the mortal killing fist. The mortal killing fist was about transformation. The purpose of transformation was to make the enemy at a loss for what to do. Perhaps it was similar to the cut of death, But it couldn't be forgotten that if the enemy's attainment in the spacetime esoteric was higher than Yi Chen's, then the cut of death would no longer be overwhelming. At that time, transformation was especially important. The limit of transformation theory was the limit of the rules. What Yi Chen needed to do was to approach this limit. As for surpassing the limit, Yi Chen didn't think about it. That was something that only legendary supremes could do. If he could do it, why would he need to accept the inheritance of the Three Realm Supremes in Three Realm Mountain? At the peak of Three Realm Mountain, a gale suddenly blew. Poof! With the flying heaven sword in hand, Yi Chen suddenly stabbed out. In an instant, 77,000 sword holes appeared on the boulder in front of him. If he wanted to have exquisite transformation, he first had to have sufficient speed. According to the essence of the mortal killing fist, Yi Chen set 3 goals for himself. The first goal was to stab 100,000 sword holes in an instant. The second goal was to stab 300,000 sword holes in an instant. The third goal was to stab 1 million sword holes in an instant. In fact, there was also the final goal, which was to stab countless sword holes in an instant. However, that was a goal that surpassed the rules and was not within the scope of consideration at the moment. Although Yi Chen's movement speed had reached the speed of light, and his sword speed was also at the speed of light, the frequency at which he swung his sword was too high, and the speed of his sword would be greatly reduced. Unleashing 77,000 sword attacks in an instant was not something that ordinary people could do. The essence of the mortal killing fist was to make it easier for him to unleash more punches. 80,000. 85,000. 90,000. 100,000. After an unknown period of time, Yi Chen finally completed the first goal. With a swing of his sword, 100,000 sword holes were densely arranged on the boulder. This was not the end. On the contrary, it was just the beginning. After an unknown amount of time, Yi Chen waved his sword out, but he could still only stab out 100,000 times. However, these 100,000 sword holes could form a complicated pattern. Some looked like a blooming flower, which would continuously bloom and then wither without an end. Some looked like ripples in the water, constantly spreading out. When Yi Chen began to move towards the second goal, he instantly stabbed 210,000 times. This was the result of using the sword holes to form complex patterns. Very smoothly, the second goal was also completed. Yi Chen began to carve words on the boulder. These words were all formed by sword holes. After carving many words, Yi Chen was not satisfied. In the end, Yi Chen chose to carve the word sword. The word sword appeared one after another, and above the word sword, sword chi soared into the sky. If ordinary life and death swordsmen saw these sword words, their sword Dao would definitely soar to the next level. This was because each sword word contained too many sword Dao insights. Chapter 1261. Yi Chen only stopped after carving a total of 108,000 sword characters. Three World Mountain was filled with huge rocks, and each of them had a sword character on it. After the relatively ordinary Three World Mountain was carved with the sword character, the aura it exuded became sharp, like peerless swords standing there. The changes were not only in quantity but also in essence. If these sword characters didn't have any essence in them, then it would be Yi Chen's failure. Among the many rocks, there was one that was very unique. It wasn't because of the uniqueness of the rocks, but because of the sword character on it. There were 108,000 sword characters on it. This sword character looked exactly the same as the other sword characters on the other rocks, but the sword chi it gave off was even denser, almost as thick as water, shaking time and space. Feeling this sword chi, it was as if countless sword techniques were surging over. It was similar to the murderous intent of the three-world killing fist. Of course, the three-world killing fist was a supreme martial art, and the gap between the two was so huge that it couldn't be calculated with common sense. I can start on the third target. Looking at the 108,000 sword characters, Yi Chen slowly retracted his gaze and waved his hand. All the rocks sank down. Three World Mountain wasn't an ordinary mountain, and it could change according to Yi Chen's will. Otherwise, ordinary rocks wouldn't be able to withstand 300,000 swords from Yi Chen. The first sword would cut it into nothingness. The wind howled, but it couldn't disturb Yi Chen's heart. Fart! The first rock rose up, and Yi Chen stabbed it with his sword. As if time had gone haywire, the number of sword holes on the rock increased rapidly. Because the speed was too fast, it looked as if they had appeared out of thin air. 580,000 swords. Carving characters allowed Yi Chen to improve rapidly, and he could stab out 580,000 swords in an instant. But this wasn't enough. Far from it. 600,000 swords. 650,000 swords. 700,000 swords. 750,000 swords. 800,000 swords. 900,000 swords. Time flowed like water, quietly passing by. After reaching 900,000 thrusts in an instant, his progress slowed down to a horrifying degree. With every 1,000 thrusts, his soul power would begin to be consumed. Yi Chen didn't expect that this would consume soul power. 910,000 swords. 920,000 swords. 930,000. When he reached 930,000 swords, Yi Chen's progress became even slower. After an unknown amount of time, he would only add another 100 or 200 swords. It was extremely strenuous. Fortunately, progress was still being made. 940,000. 950,000. 960,000. I'm almost at my limit. Yi Chen looked exhausted, and couldn't help but swallow a magnificent violet soul refining pill. In the blink of an eye, he had unleashed 960,000 swords. Yi Chen's soul force was being consumed very quickly. It was almost as if he was using an ordinary soul attack. If not for the magnificent violet soul refining pill replenishing his soul force, he might not have been able to maintain it. Apart from that, his current progress was so slow that it made people's hair stand on end. Basically, he was increasing his soul force by a few swords. At 970,000 swords, he would be increasing his soul force by one sword at a time. Yi Chen's guess was right. At 970,000 swords, it was indeed an increase of one sword at a time. Finally, 980,000 swords. One sword, one world. One sword, one dust. In the following time, Yi Chen entered a mysterious realm. It was like when he stabbed out a sword, it was no longer a simple sword, but a sword that contained everything. And this sword that contained everything would eventually turn into a dust. Everything in the world is just a dust. With a sigh in his heart, Yi Chen's eyes became firmer. Pu. On the giant stone, 999,900 swords suddenly appeared. These 999,900 sword holes formed a word that no one could recognize. This was the sword word that Yi Chen had created. Looking at it seriously, it looked like the change word. It looked like a sword but not a sword, like change but not change. This was a sword word that could change. It could also be said that it was a word that was displaying a sword art. Kai 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 kai. What Yi Chen didn't expect was that this strange sword word would suddenly come to life. It turned into a peerless sword art and attacked Yi Chen. Every move was so exquisite and hard to dodge. Even Yi Chen was a little caught off guard. He was attacked until he kept retreating, unable to fight back. Could this be a phenomenon caused by approaching the limit of change? Yi Chen guessed in his heart. The essence of change was that it was alive and not dead. When the sword stabbed out, it was a spiritual world. Everything in the world was in it. Thousands of changes were also in it. It was equivalent to having one's own wisdom. However, this wisdom was imposed by oneself, which gave him a certain degree of autonomy. No wonder the mortal world killing fist was so hard to resist. It was incredible. When the change reached that level, it was really turning the rotten into the magical, turning the impossible into the possible. Ding ding dang dang. After all, it contained his own sword art. Although Yi Chen was caught off guard, he wouldn't be defeated. After a few breaths, Yi Chen had already turned the situation around. Omniscient nature, wandering. With a sharp look in his eyes, Yi Chen performed the most transformative sword attack. This sword, omniscient nature, was like a dream. Hualala. The strange sword word returned to its original position as if it had never moved. Putting the flying sword back into its scabbard, Yi Chen slowly let out a breath. 999,900 swords is already my limit. The next 100 swords are a forbidden zone for now, a forbidden zone that goes against the rules. I reckon that I'll have to break through in all aspects before I can truly reach the million swords realm. Omniscient nature was all-encompassing. It blurred the boundary between reality and illusion. For the current Yi Chen, it was enough. The 5 elements sword art had its ups and downs. 5 elements sword art's 5 elements / 5 elements sword art's omniscient nature. Spacetime sword art's death cut. Before entering the Supreme Holy Land, Yi Chen's Supreme Sword Art had yet to reach a higher level, but now he had 4 Supreme Sword Arts. Each of them was no longer so immature and had its essence. These 4 sword arts each had their own characteristics. Ups and downs could weaken the enemy's attack power and attack changes. 5 elements / was an extreme sword, combining the 5 elements into one. Omniscient nature contained the world's myriad forms and was close to the extreme of change. Death / cut through time and space like cutting through cheese, sealing off all the enemy's escape routes. Even if one could dodge in time, they wouldn't be able to because this sword even sealed time. Not bad. You have stayed on 3 World Mountain for a total of 10 3-world years. The middle-aged man appeared. 3 world years. Yi Chen was puzzled. 3 World Mountain's sense of time is blurry. 10 3-world years is equivalent to 100 years in the outside world. The middle-aged man explained. So it has been 100 years. Yi Chen sighed. In the blink of an eye, 100 years had passed. But here, the sense of time was too blurry, to the point that he neglected the existence of time. Time and space are 2 of the meanings of life. When you can ignore time and space one day, you would either be dead, or you would have become a demigod. I hope it's the latter. Smiling, the middle-aged man continued, I can see the entanglement of fate in you. Your opponents are all very powerful, far stronger than before. Go, in this world, there will always be a few years that are especially exciting. It's time for fate to collapse, for gods and devils to fight each other. The middle-aged man waved his hand. Yi Chen instantly vanished from 3 World Mountain. Before he left, Yi Chen knew that this middle-aged man was the paragon of the 3 realms. He died after becoming a demigod. Yi Chen didn't know how powerful a demigod was, but Yi Chen could imagine that even if a demigod died, he would still be alive to a certain extent. Chapter 1262. The Supreme of the 3 Realms waved his hand and sent Yi Chen to the periphery of the Supreme Sacred Ground. The exit was right next to him. At this moment, there were already many people like Yi Chen, waiting for the exit to open. The opening time of the Supreme Sacred Ground's exit wasn't fixed. It would only open when the last inheritor left the mountain. Otherwise, they could only wait here. Yi Chen, Murong Qingcheng and Xu Jing had already received the inheritance. When they saw Yi Chen, their figures flashed and they flew over. How are you guys? Yi Chen asked. Murong Qingcheng replied, I received Supreme Rose's inheritance. I received Supreme Dragon's inheritance. Xu Jing also said. Supreme Rose was a powerful Supreme from 3 million years ago, while Supreme Dragon was a Super Supreme from 50 million years ago. The former's light and dark rose palm could allow one to ignore the existence of time and age indefinitely. The latter was the pride of the dragon race, and his Dragon Wings Wisdom Palm and Dragon Wings Taishu were famous all over the world. Whose inheritance did you receive? Murong Qingcheng guessed that Yi Chen must have received the inheritance of a sword venerable. Supreme of the 3 Realms. Supreme of the 3 Realms? Xu Jing frowned. Supreme of the 3 Realms wasn't a sword venerable, but he was stronger than most sword venerables. He was one of the 7 legendary Supremes of the human race. If Yi Chen could fully understand the Supreme of the 3 Realms killing fist and turn it into his own sword technique, he would at least become a legendary Supremes. Haha, Yi Chen, you're out too. It seems that you've received the inheritance. The Golden Robe Emperor laughed and flew over. Yi Chen still had a good impression of the Golden Robe Emperor. You must have gained quite a lot too, right? Just so. You should have heard of the Golden Supremes, right? Yi Chen thought for a while and shook his head. The Golden Robe Emperor smiled bitterly and was about to explain. Xu Jing interrupted, the leakless Golden Supremes. He was a supreme from 1 billion years ago. That's right. The golden-robed emperor smiled. Although the Golden Sovereign wasn't a legend sovereign had once said that under the same conditions, he wasn't a match for the Golden Sovereign. The Golden Sphere could be said to be the most frightening defensive method. It was flawless and flawless. Right, what about you? The golden-robed emperor looked at Yi Chen. As for Xu Jing and Murong Qingcheng, they were completely ignored by the golden-robed emperor. He treated them as Yi Chen's confidants. The paragon of the 3 realms. Hiss. The golden-robed emperor sucked in a breath of cold air. You freak. You even found the tomb of a legendary paragon, and it was one of the 7 legendary paragons of the human race. Gold Supremes were very famous. They were equivalent to ordinary legendary Supremes. However, compared to the Supremes of the 3 realms, they were more than a level lower. Even under the same conditions, the 3 realms' killing fist could pierce through the golden circle. The former's attack was simply unblockable. Now that you mention it, my hands are getting a little itchy. Why don't we have a spar? There's still some time before the exit of the Supreme Holy Land opens. The golden-robed emperor suggested. He really wanted to know how much of the 3 realms Supreme's inheritance Yi Chen had obtained. Of course, the most important thing was to test out his own gains. All right. The golden-robed emperor's suggestion tempted Yi Chen. Look, the golden-robed emperor is about to fight someone. Who is it? He can actually fight against the golden-robed emperor? He is one of the 4 young paragons. He looks even younger than the golden-robed emperor. I guess the latter wants to give him some pointers. The 2 flew into the sky, facing each other from a distance. Everyone in the vicinity immediately cast their gazes over. The eyesight of an 8th-level life and death realm heavenly emperor was extremely sharp. However, most of them didn't recognize Yi Chen. Of course, some of them had heard of Yi Chen's name, but they didn't associate this blue-robed youngster with Yi Chen. In their opinion, Yi Chen's progress shouldn't be this fast. To be able to fight against the golden-robed emperor, even with the latter's guidance, he should at least have the strength of a peak emperor warrior. Yi Chen, be careful. My heaven-covering staff arts have improved a lot. Your 5 elements sword arts might not be able to block it, the golden-robed emperor warned. Yi Chen casually said, bring it on. That might not be the case. All right, take this. The golden-robed emperor didn't hold back. The moment the golden staff appeared, a majestic aura soared into the sky like a beacon. In the next moment, the golden-robed emperor leaped high into the sky and brandished his staff. Countless staff shadows blotted out the sky, replacing the heaven and earth. It was as if he wanted to change the world and rebuild it. It's indeed several times stronger than before. Before, the golden-robed emperor's heaven-covering staff arts weren't this powerful. Now, the heaven-covering staff arts had fewer flaws. But my 5 elements sword arts aren't what they used to be. Pulling out the flying heaven sword, Yi Chen brandished his sword and used the 5 elements sword arts. The 5 elements sword arts were quite powerful in terms of defense. After obtaining the essence of the 3 realms paragon's martial arts, Yi Chen's 5 elements sword arts foundation had risen to a whole new level. The 5 elements rotated, and there were no flaws. When it was used, it turned into a white ball of light that enveloped Yi Chen. Bang, 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 bang. Endless explosions rang out. The heaven-covering staff arts attacks were natural, and ordinary defenses were useless. Unfortunately, the 5 elements sword arts couldn't be underestimated either. The 2 were locked in a stalemate. All right, heaven-covering staff arts. The golden-robed emperor was decisive in dealing with such a defensive sword art. In an instant, the countless staff shadows merged into one, forming a giant staff that swept toward Yi Chen. 5 elements slash. Naturally, Yi Chen didn't dare to use ordinary 5 elements sword arts to defend against the heaven-covering staff arts. The white ball of light disappeared, and a 5-colored sword aura shot out to meet the giant staff. Boom! The two of them retreated rapidly, and the shockwaves came one after another, causing those who were close to them to be thrown off their feet. The golden-robed emperor's eyes turned solemn. He didn't expect that Yi Chen would improve so quickly after receiving the inheritance. Back then, Yi Chen was still a bit weaker than him. Yi Chen, in the past 80 years, I've not only improved the heaven-covering staff arts to a new level, but I've also integrated the essence of the Gold Paragon's martial arts to create the Golden Staff Arts. Compared to the heaven-covering staff arts, my Golden Staff Arts aren't as good as the Gold Paragon's in terms of fire control, but it's more lethal, faster, and more ferocious. Although the sparring between the two of them wouldn't be life-threatening, the golden-robed emperor didn't want to hurt Yi Chen. So before he used the Golden Staff Arts, he told Yi Chen the characteristics of the Golden Staff Arts. This golden-robed emperor sure is straightforward. Yi Chen nodded and said, "Next, I'll use the spacetime sword art, Death Slash." Death Slash. The golden-robed emperor was stunned, and then he smiled and said, "All right, I've underestimated you." Roar. Suddenly, a dazzling golden light burst from the golden-robed emperor's body, and the golden light gave off a wild feeling that disrespected heaven and earth. At that moment, the golden-robed emperor seemed to have changed into a different person, and his eyes were filled with aggression. Buzz! Hong Zhong's loud voice sounded, and the golden-robed emperor flew toward Yi Chen like lightning. The next moment, the golden light fanned out toward Yi Chen, and the shadows of the staff were everywhere. I wonder how he's going to block it. The purple-robed emperor, the white-robed emperor, and the green-robed emperor were all watching the battle. Chapter 1263. What a ferocious staff technique. Yi Chen's eyes narrowed. Supreme martial arts all had their own specialties. Although the 5-element slash was powerful, it was too monotonous and couldn't block the golden staff technique at all. On the other hand, the death cut was a concentrated attack that sealed space and time. The golden staff technique can permeate space and time. It's not that easy to block. The golden-clad emperor was very confident in the golden staff technique. In terms of smoothness, the golden staff technique couldn't compare to the heaven-covering staff technique, but in terms of penetration and lethality, the heaven-covering staff technique couldn't compare. All of a sudden, clang, 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 sparks exploded between the two, as if there were countless Yi Chen fighting against countless golden-clad emperors. What? He blocked it. The golden-clad emperor was shocked. Golden-clad emperor, didn't I say that my death cut is a space-time sword technique? As long as you're within the space-time range of my sword technique, you won't be able to escape. Yi Chen smiled. Indeed. The golden-clad emperor nodded. At this point, he had to admit that Yi Chen was already on the same level as him. Of course, he didn't know that Yi Chen had already comprehended the heart sword realm. If he could use it, Yi Chen's strength would skyrocket. In addition, Yi Chen also had a boundless nature. Supreme martial arts didn't focus on how powerful they were. No matter how powerful they were, if they couldn't hit the enemy, then it would be useless. Supreme martial arts focused on absoluteness, or absolute power, or absolute undodgeability, or absolute defense. Although boundless nature couldn't be considered absolute, it could be considered absolute in the quasi-Zun realm. It was even more terrifying than the powerful 5-element slash, and even more unfathomable than the death cut. Golden-clad emperor, do you still want to fight? Yi Chen could tell that the golden-clad emperor wasn't going to fight anymore. He had probably used up all his tricks. As for his other tricks, he probably hadn't mastered them yet. After all, he had to absorb the inheritance he had obtained. It was already praiseworthy that he was able to create the golden staff technique. I don't want to fight anymore. You're really a monster. Among the humans, you can almost be called the #1 sword emperor. In the human race, the sword emperor and the saber emperor were more controversial. Up until now, the title of sword emperor had not appeared. It was not an exaggeration to say that Yi Chen was the sword emperor. Sword emperor? Yi Chen smiled but didn't say anything. Yi Chen is amazing. He's actually able to fight to a draw with the golden-robed emperor. The golden-robed emperor is one of the 4 young quasi-sovereigns of the human race, and is one of the top ones on the list. Everyone heard the golden-robed emperor call out Yi Chen's name, and they knew that he was the genius leader of the paradise of gods. Almost everyone in the top 30 of the quasi-sovereign ranking is an invincible quasi-sovereign. This Yi Chen just came out of the paradise of gods. TSK, he can be considered the #1 genius of this epoch. An epoch was 10 million years. It's not just this epoch. There wasn't such a monstrous genius in the last epoch either. However, it's still unknown whether or not he can continue to be this monstrous. After all, if he doesn't become a supreme being, everything else will be meaningless. Right, since he doesn't have the Sword Emperor title yet, why don't we give it to Yi Chen? Someone suggested. Ordinary titles could be chosen by oneself, but a prestigious title like Sword Emperor had to be acknowledged by everyone. Who here wasn't an influential figure among 8th-layer life and death heavenly kings? Many of them were even quasi-sovereigns. With their acknowledgement, Yi Chen's Sword Emperor title would be confirmed. As for whether or not he could keep the title, it had nothing to do with them. I think it's feasible. The human race hasn't had a Sword Emperor for a long time. He might be able to keep it. Many people agreed. Haha, I'm Ru Yi. You must be Yi Chen, right? Your reputation is well deserved. We'll give you a title, but I wonder if you dare to accept it. An aged quasi-sovereign walked out. He was very happy to see the rise of the younger generation. With the great war between humans and demonic beasts at hand, having a bit more power would be beneficial to everyone. However, the prerequisite was whether or not Yi Chen had the courage. What title? Yi Chen glanced over. Sword Emperor. Ru Yi unblinkingly stared at Yi Chen. Yi Chen wasn't too surprised. Everyone's conversation just now wasn't concealed, so he said, I'm indebted to everyone for looking up to me. If I say no, it would make me look like a fake Taishu. Sword Emperor title, Yi Chen will take it. Good. Indeed, heroes come from youngsters. Ru Yi laughed heartily. Sword Emperor Yi Chen is truly enviable. Some people are innately dazzling, and no matter how low-key they are, they can't do it. But there are still some Sword Emperors in the human race. Apart from them, there are also a few Sword Emperors in the foreign races. I reckon that they will also want to kill Yi Chen. Sword Emperor is naturally unique. Therefore, he must be unique among Sword Emperors as well. Hearing everyone's discussion, the golden-robed emperor smiled and said to Yi Chen, Now, your Sword Emperor title is set in stone. Actually, he meant to say that Yi Chen was the #1 Sword Emperor. It would be too unreasonable for such a genius to not have a title of his own. However, you also have to be careful. There are 4 Sword Emperors on the Quasi-Venerables list. They are the 48th Boundless Sword Emperor, the 27th Chijue Sword Emperor, the 13th Night Sword Emperor, and the 4th Evil Sword Emperor. The former is not much of a threat, but the Chijue Sword Emperor cannot be underestimated. As for the Yaksho race's Night Sword Emperor and the Evil Spirit race's Evil Sword Emperor, they are your true enemies. Now, the Quasi-Venerables list was basically monopolized by youngsters. Among the 4 Sword Emperors, only the Boundless Sword Emperor was older. The other 3 were all youngsters. I'll be careful. Yi Chen nodded. He naturally wouldn't be careless, especially after the Supreme Holy Land opened. It had to be known that not only did the human race have a Supreme Holy Land, but the demons also had a land of divinity and demons, the Evil Spirit race had a land of evil spirits, the Barbarian race had a wild Holy Land, and the Giant race had a giant spirit graveyard. In terms of perception, he was not afraid of anyone. However, others had cultivated for much longer than him. Moreover, at his current realm, sometimes a momentary difference was not the true difference. In short, the further one went, perception, opportunity, and time were all indispensable. Sword Emperor? What a joke. How many years has a boy cultivated, yet he dares to call himself Sword Emperor? Right at this moment, a cold and slightly aged voice sounded out. Everyone looked over. It's the White-Bone Sword Emperor. Someone recognized the person's identity. The white bone sword emperor was one of the previous generation's sword emperors. Because he had not appeared for many years, he had always been in seclusion, so his name was not on the quasi-venerables list. However, no one dared to underestimate him, because 30,000 years ago, he was also ranked high on the quasi-venerables list. Although he was a human, he had always been harsh. Perhaps it was related to the cultivation technique he cultivated. He cultivated the yin-yang white bone sword art, and his true essence was sinister and crafty. Chapter 1264. Yi Chen, the first one to challenge you has appeared. This white bone sword emperor hasn't appeared for 30,000 years. I'm not sure how strong he is right now. 30,000 years ago, his white bone time sword art was one of the fastest quasi-sovereigns. Now that 30,000 years have passed, he should be even stronger. Be careful. Golden-robed emperor didn't want to stick up for Yi Chen. After all, Yi Chen's current status was no lower than his. Forcefully sticking up for him would only be superfluous. If Yi Chen wanted to keep the title of Sword Emperor, he could only rely on himself. I know what I'm doing. Yi Chen nodded and looked at the white bone Sword Emperor. The title of Sword Emperor is due to everyone's praise. But since Senior White Bone Sword Emperor cares so much, I can give it to you. Give it to me. The White Bone Sword Emperor was a little surprised and mocked. I thought you had some guts, but you're only SOSO. But since you're so tactful, I won't make things difficult for you. The White Bone Sword Emperor had been in seclusion for 30,000 years, and he thought that his progress was godly. This time, he came out for two reasons. Firstly, he wanted to find his own inheritance in the Supreme Holy Land, and secondly, he wanted to tell everyone that he, the White Bone Sword Emperor, had come out of seclusion. As for the position of Sword Emperor, he was determined to obtain it. What made him even more confident was that during this trip to the Supreme Holy Land, he had finally obtained a supreme inheritance. Although the deceased Supreme was only an ordinary Supreme, to a quasi-Supreme like him who had lived for many years, it was undoubtedly like adding wings to a tiger. Yi Chen smiled. I said I'll give it to you, but you need to be strong enough to take it. Otherwise, it'll be too much of a joke. Hehe, this Yi Chen is really relaxed, as if he doesn't put the White Bone Sword Emperor in his eyes. Youngsters are more insolent. But that's right, if they don't, they wouldn't be youngsters. Yes, being arrogant is the right thing to do. I wonder how the White Bone Sword Emperor will respond. Hearing Yi Chen's words, the surrounding people couldn't help but laugh. Junior, you're too arrogant. The White Bone Sword Emperor's face darkened. His eyes flickered and suddenly, a black and white sword light shot out. This was the eye sword art that contained a soul attack. Pop! Unfortunately, the moment the black and white sword light appeared, it was annihilated by the golden light emitted from between Yi Chen's eyebrows. When it came to soul attacks, Yi Chen wasn't afraid of anyone below the Supreme Being level. White Bone Sword Emperor, please advise me. Yi Chen didn't waste any more words. He knew that he had to defeat the White Bone Sword Emperor today. Very well, let me have a taste of your skills. Based on the strength of Yi Chen and the golden-clothed emperor, the White Bone Sword Emperor had a 70% chance of defeating Yi Chen. It had to be known that they were both peak existences among quasi-sovereigns, so a 70% chance of victory was not a small amount. Buzz. The White Bone Sword Emperor did not directly attack and only closed his eyes. When he opened them again, a powerful domain spread out, and because this domain was so powerful, it even started to become corporeal. The outer walls of the domain and the spatial barrier were filled with white bones that had countless sword runes on them. A sharp and terrifying aura spread out, permeating through space and time. The 8th level of Sword Domain, White Bone Sword Domain. What? The White Bone Sword Emperor's sword domain has broken through to the 8th level. This time, Yi Chen is in trouble. Although the sword domain is only a part of one's strength, if the difference between the two sword domains is too great, their strength will also be greatly affected. One side's strength will be amplified by the sword domain, while the other side's strength will be weakened by the sword domain. This battle is going to be very difficult. Everyone was shocked and couldn't help but look at Yi Chen. When Yi Chen fought with the golden-clothed emperor, The sword domain only protected him and didn't spread out. Therefore, they didn't know what level Yi Chen's sword domain had reached. However, to be honest, they didn't think that Yi Chen's sword domain had also reached the 8th level. Under normal circumstances, the younger generation's sword domain would be slightly lower than the older generation. Only those who had cultivated for a long time could compete with the older generation. For example, the purple-clothed emperor's sword domain had reached the 8th level, while Yi Chen had only cultivated for a few hundred years. I didn't expect this white-boned sword emperor to really amaze the world with a single brilliant feat, the golden-clothed emperor frowned. He admitted that he had underestimated the white-boned sword emperor. If he was the one fighting with the white-boned sword emperor, the final result wouldn't be good. Of course, he still had a trump card that he hadn't used yet, and that was the golden orb of the golden sovereign. Once he used the golden orb, he would be able to protect himself. Xu Jing and Murong Qingcheng, who were very familiar with Yi Chen, didn't have any changes in their expressions. This was because when the white-boned sword emperor revealed the 8th level of the sword domain, Yi Chen smiled. The others didn't notice it, but the two of them did. "Do we still need to fight?" The white-boned sword emperor said confidently. An ordinary sovereign's sword domain was only at the 8th level. Of course, the majority of sovereigns' sword domains were at the late stage of the 8th level or even the peak stage of the 8th level. That might not be the case. Yi Chen's expression was indifferent. His blue clothes fluttered without any wind. Suddenly, an even more terrifying sword domain spread out. This sword domain was also at the 8th level. What was different from the past was that numerous azure lotuses bloomed in the sword domain, and within the lotuses were numerous peerless swords. The vast and boundless sword chi caused even space to ripple. What? It's also the 8th level of the sword domain? Everyone was shocked. How old was Yi Chen? His sword domain had actually reached the 8th level. What was even more inconceivable was that Yi Chen's sword domain seemed to be even more terrifying than the white-boned sword emperor's sword domain. The sword Dao contained within it was even purer. It's sword yuan. Using sword yuan to propel the sword domain is much more terrifying than using true yuan. At this moment, those who didn't think that Yi Chen could keep the title of sword emperor were shaken. With the 8th level of the sword domain propelled by sword yuan, it wasn't impossible for Yi Chen to keep the title of sword emperor. Damn it. This kid has actually broken through to the 8th level as well. The white-boned sword emperor was secretly annoyed. He had no idea that Yi Chen's sword domain was originally only at the 6th level. Even after some improvements, it was only at the peak of the 6th level. However, after reaching the supreme realm of the Way of the Sword, the Heart Sword, Yi Chen's sword domain grew stronger every single day. In the end, it reached the early 8th level in one go. If he had enough time, it would be possible for him to reach the peak of the 8th level. The Heart Sword was the supreme realm of the Way of the Sword. It represented that Yi Chen had already touched upon the final mysteries of the Way of the Sword. Yi Chen used the 7th level of the sword domain in his battle against the gold-clothed emperor. After all, he didn't want to defeat the gold-clothed emperor so easily in front of everyone. Moreover, the gold-clothed emperor would definitely be holding back. Crackle. Their sword domains came into contact with each other, and countless sounds of destruction rang out. The white-boned sword domain was extremely impressive in terms of defense, while Yi Chen's green lotus sword domain was offensive. As soon as the two collided, it was like lightning striking the ground, erupting with an unprecedented shockwave. Chapter 1265. Crack, crack. Just as everyone had expected, Yi Chen's green lotus sword realm was powered by sword yuan after all, which was much more stable and sharp than the white-boned sword emperor's white-boned sword realm. After a while, the white-boned sword realm started to crack, and the green lotus sword realm started to seep in. The white-boned sword emperor snorted and put away his white-boned sword realm, only using it to protect himself. This way, the range would be smaller, but the defense would be much stronger. Yi Chen's green lotus sword realm wouldn't be able to do anything to him. Of course, there was a downside, which was that Yi Chen's green lotus sword realm had a wide range, which was enough to affect his condition. However, Yi Chen didn't rely on this. He also put away his Green Lotus Sword realm to protect himself. White Bone Sword Emperor, your White Bone Time Sword art is said to be one of the fastest sword arts among quasi-sovereigns. My Death Cleave contains the profound of time and space, which is also very fast. How about we compete? Although Yi Chen wouldn't look down on the White Bone Sword Emperor, he wouldn't think too highly of it either. With the Heart Sword realm, the White Bone Sword Emperor wouldn't be able to threaten him unless he was several times more powerful than the Golden-Robed Emperor. As far as he was concerned, the White Bone Sword Emperor was a pretty good sparring partner. He had been training his sword arts on the Three Worlds Mountain, but if he wanted to perfect his sword arts, sparring with powerful opponents was also indispensable. Back then, the Three Worlds Killing Fist was able to shake the world, and it had a lot to do with his experience in battles. Take this. Without giving the opponent a chance to speak, Yi Chen flicked his wrist and performed the Death Cleave. In an instant, a dense net of swords spread out, covering the White Bone Sword Emperor. The Death Cleave contained perfect space profound and 20% time profound. In terms of trajectory, it was almost perfect. However, in terms of timing, it wasn't perfect. Yi Chen wanted to see how the White Bone Sword Emperor would break this sword. The Golden-Robed Emperor couldn't be considered to have broken this sword. It could only be said that the Golden Staff arts were too overbearing. Small tricks. Although he said so, the White Bone Sword Emperor didn't slow down. His sword was a white bone sword with a milky white body and a longer tip than normal swords. Shoo, 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 shoo. In an instant, it was as if countless White Bone Sword Emperors had appeared. Every White Bone Sword Emperor had a different posture, but what was similar was that as he swung his sword again and again, the fine sword net was annihilated in an extremely orderly manner. Indeed, as long as the opponent also has space and time profound, my death cut will have many flaws. This White Bone Sword Emperor easily found the flaws of my death cut and broke them one by one from weak to strong. Yi Chen was not in a hurry and continued to use Death Slash. After a short while, the White Bone Sword Monarch started to feel a bit impatient. His opponent was only using this move over and over again, as if he was just a sparring partner. He also discovered that there were fewer loopholes in Death Cleave, and it was no longer that easy to break through. Have a taste of my White Bone Light Evasion Slash. The White Bone Sword Emperor drew a complete circle with its white bone sword. In the next moment, space-time distorted into a shocking arc. The sword net that Yi Chen had sent out was actually refracted towards Yi Chen himself. Space and time profound is vast and profound. I am not as good as the White Bone Sword Emperor. From this sword attack, Yi Chen could tell that the White Bone Sword Emperor's spacetime sword art was indeed one level higher than his, and the opponent had not even used his White Bone Time sword art yet. Clang! Clang! Using Death Slash to deal with Death Slash, Yi Chen dealt with it very easily. Hey! Two intersecting sword lights suddenly flashed and swept past Yi Chen's neck, tearing a hole in the Green Lotus sword domain. These two sword lights were a part of the Death Slash that Yi Chen had sent out before. However, the White Bone Sword Emperor had used some unknown method to twist the spacetime and change their trajectory and time sequence, which was why Yi Chen had almost been hit. The older, the wiser. In terms of spacetime sword art, Yi Chen is not as good as the White Bone Sword Emperor. I wonder how Yi Chen will deal with the White Bone Time sword art? While the crowd was discussing, the White Bone Sword Emperor finally exploded. He turned into a beam of white light and shot towards Yi Chen. The space flickered incessantly, and each flash would make people want to vomit blood. Because it contained the charm of spacetime disorder, it was impossible to lock onto his exact location. Lose. Beams of white light shot out. These were the sword lights from the White Bone Time sword art. Each sword light actually contained the power of space and time. Ordinary methods would not be able to block them. If one could block the power of space, they would not be able to block the power of time. The overlapping of spacetime was enough to carry out a spacetime dimensional attack. Powerful. This was the first time that Yi Chen had seen such a terrifying spacetime sword art. Compared to it, Death Cleave was indeed much more immature. However, Yi Chen still had the 5-element sword art. In terms of defense, the 5-element sword art was rather terrifying. Almost instantly, Yi Chen was enveloped by the white light sphere that was glowing with a 5-colored halo. The white light sphere formed a world of its own and similarly contained space-time. It wouldn't be easy for the white bone time sword art to invade it. The sound of bubbles bursting rang out. Countless sword lights penetrated into the white light sphere. However, as the sword lights penetrated deeper, their speed became slower and slower. In the end, they became stagnant and could no longer move. The power is weakening. The white bone sword emperor squinted his eyes. How could he not see that Yi Chen's 5-element sword art was not only very impressive in terms of defense, but it could also weaken the power and transformations of his sword art. 5-element sword art, rise and fall. Sometimes, rise and fall wasn't very useful against enemies that were too strong. This was because he had his own limits. However, if it was used against someone who was similar to him, it would be extremely terrifying. It could weaken the enemy's attack power and transformations. It could be said to be a divine technique. This Yi Chen hid quite a bit of his strength when fighting against me. The gold-robed emperor smiled bitterly. If Yi Chen had used the 8th level of sword domain earlier, he could only take a beating. The white bone sword emperor's expression was very gloomy. He had originally thought that he had a 70% chance of defeating Yi Chen. However, who knew that Yi Chen not only had the 8th level of sword domain, but also had such a powerful defensive sword art. Although his white bone time sword art was impossible to dodge, what could the white bone sword emperor do unless he could break through Yi Chen's defense? Forget it. I've obtained the sovereign's inheritance. In the future, I'll have the chance to perfect my sword art. I might even create a new sword art. There's no meaning in hiding it. It'll only make people look down on me. Having made up his mind, the white bone sword emperor's aura suddenly soared. Sword burial art. This sword contained the profound of space-time. It was different from the white bone time sword art. This sword buried time. Of course, it buried the opponent's time. There's actually such a sword art. Yi Chen's blood and qi were boiling. He discovered that no matter what he did, he couldn't use the 5-element sword art. His time seemed to be locked by the opponent's sword art. The older generation really can't be underestimated. These old fellows always hide their strength. If it wasn't related to face, the white bone sword emperor probably wouldn't use this sword art. The purple-robed emperor sighed. The white-robed emperor nodded. Indeed. He was a man of few words. The white bone sword emperor could already see the result of the sword burial art. Unfortunately, white bone sword emperor, you are indeed very powerful. However, this is still not enough. Suddenly, the space-time around Yi Chen fluctuated. The white bone sword emperor's sword burial art was bounced off. It was as if there was an invisible Yi Chen using the 5-element sword art. Chapter 1266. Heart Sword. The stronger the heart was, the more powerful the sword art would be. The sword burial art could seal Yi Chen's body, but it couldn't seal Yi Chen's heart. Impossible. Less than 10 people under the supremacy realm can block my sword burial art. His space-time profundity isn't as high as mine, so how could he block it? The white bone sword emperor couldn't believe his eyes. The sword burial art was created based on the essence of supremacy flower burial and his own understanding of space-time profundity. It could seal the opponent's time in an instant. Of course, his time profundity was only at 20%, so it wasn't absolute. However, Yi Chen's time profundity didn't surpass his. How could he know that Yi Chen had already entered the Heart Sword realm? Under the Heart Sword realm, one might be sealed. But, after reaching the Heart Sword realm, the power of the heart would be unimaginable. Whatever the heart thought, everything would become the truth. The white bone sword emperor's sword burial spell could not lock onto Yi Chen's heart at all, so how could it seal his heart sword? What a terrifying sword burial art. If I hadn't comprehended the Heart Sword realm, I would have suffered a great loss. With the white bone sword emperor as an example, Yi Chen warned himself that he could not underestimate some of the older generation warriors. These people might not be as famous as the young martial geniuses on the list, but they had lived for countless years, and more or less had some trump cards. As long as they were given the right opportunity, they would be able to create an extremely powerful martial art after accumulating a lot of experience. Of course, the older generation couldn't be underestimated. Yi Chen wouldn't look down on those on the quasi-venerables ranking. The golden-robed emperor was ranked 24th. This trip to the sovereign Holy Land might have raised his ranking, but it was also possible that his ranking would fall instead. Who knew how much the others had improved? Especially those in the top 10, they had probably already reached the pinnacle of the quasi-venerables realm. My sword art might seem powerful, but it's still immature, especially when compared to the white-bone sword emperor. However, I still haven't used omniscient nature. This is the essence of the 5 elements sword art. Yi Chen wasn't too sure how strong omniscient nature was. He could only find out by testing it on his opponent. Sword burial art. The white-bone sword emperor did not believe it and once again used the sword burial art to attack Yi Chen. In his eyes, Yi Chen had a treasure that did not fear time, which was why he did not fear his sword burial art. However, the potential of a treasure was limited, and it could not be used endlessly. There would always be a time when its power was used up. As long as his opponent did not have a treasure, there was nothing to worry about. Twice. 3 times. 5 times. 9 times. Yi Chen didn't counterattack. He was very interested in the sword burial technique. After blocking the sword burial technique time and time again, he was able to slowly understand the true face of the sword burial technique. As long as he could obtain a trace of its essence, even if it wasn't all of it, it would be extremely useful to Yi Chen. He could use this trace of essence to combine it with the martial arts essence of the 3 realms paragon and his own understanding of the space-time ultimacy to create a sword technique similar to the sword burial technique. The 13th time. This time, the white-bone sword emperor went all out and used the sword burial art at full force. Even the onlookers could see that the space around Yi Chen had started to freeze, and Yi Chen himself seemed to be wrapped in a transparent crystal, completely sealed. In front of him, an incomparably sharp sword light pierced towards him. Clang. However, it was all in vain. Yi Chen did not even move, and the incomparably sharp sword light was directly deflected and turned into nothingness. White Robe Emperor, do you know what kind of technique this is? The Purple Robe Emperor frowned slightly and turned his head to ask the White Robe Emperor. The White Robe Emperor was silent for a moment, then slowly said, if I guessed correctly, it should be the Heart Sword realm. However, I have never heard of anyone below the Paragon level being able to reach the Heart Sword realm. Yes. The one who spoke was the Cyan Robe Emperor. The Yasha race's Yi Zhenhuang and the Evil Spirit race's Evil Sword Emperor have both reached the Heart Sword realm, the Cyan Robe Emperor continued. Oh! The Purple Robe Emperor's face flashed with surprise. He still trusted the Cyan Robe Emperor's words. The latter never lied, and he would not say something he was not sure of. As for the Yi Zhenhuang and the Evil Sword Emperor, the Purple Robe Emperor had seen their detailed information. As geniuses of different races, the possibility of them meeting each other was very small. Once they did, it might mean that one side would die. The Yi Zhenhuang and the Evil Sword Emperor were naturally not called Yi Zhenhuang and the Evil Sword Emperor. They were called Sword Emperors in their respective races, but the human race did not recognize them, so they added a word to each of them. Just like how other races would not recognize Yi Chen's title as Sword Emperor, they might add a word to him, making him the Human Sword Emperor. From the information, the Yi Zhenhuang and the Evil Sword Emperor were naturally very terrifying. One was ranked 13th on the quasi-venerable list, while the other was ranked 4th. Their reputations were definitely not undeserved. According to the information, the Yi Zhenhuang's heavenless great sword art had already reached an extremely terrifying realm. It must be because of the Heart Sword realm that he had such power. As for the Evil Sword Emperor's Evil Sword of Misfortune, only its name was known. No one had ever seen this sword art before. White-robed Emperor, it's been 1,000 years since I've seen you fight. I wonder what level your strength has reached. The war between humans and demons is both terrifying and exciting. That is the most glorious and cruel time. The Purple Robe Emperor clenched his fists tightly. Now was the time for everyone to accumulate power. Whoever improved would be the one laughing at the end, overlooking the starry sky. There were a few more spectators. They were Du Guju, Chu Zhongtian, Dan Tai Mingyu, and the others. Yang Qingxian had also come. Without exception, their gazes were all focused on Yi Chen. Everyone's gaze was complicated. Yang Qingshuan's gaze was a little strange. She seemed to be looking at Yi Chen, but at the same time, she didn't seem to be looking at him. But in the end, she was still looking at him. He's always so dazzling. Isn't he afraid of being burned by his own radiance? Chu Zhongtian sighed. This didn't sound like something he would say. Some people are born to be worshipped. What we can do is perhaps follow behind him and witness his legend. Dan Tai Mingyu said softly. After the sword burial art failed 13 times in a row, the White Bone Sword Emperor finally gave up. You should have comprehended the Heart Sword realm. But how much of its power can you unleash? The White Bone Sword Emperor could already confirm that Yi Chen had reached the Heart Sword realm. Unfortunately, the Heart Sword realm was the hardest to control. To use it to greatly increase the power of one's sword was as difficult as ascending to the heavens. Yi Jianhuang was an exception. As for the Evil Sword Emperor's evil sword of misfortune, no one knew what was going on. There's no need for the Heart Sword realm. I have a sword. Please give me some pointers. After obtaining the essence of the three realms' sovereign's martial arts, Yi Chen could naturally use the Heart Sword realm to increase the power of his sword. But the White Bone Sword Emperor wasn't worth it. Boundless nature was enough. He relaxed his body and raised his right arm. The Flying Heaven sword was in a straight line with his eyebrows. There was no sound. Yi Chen's sword and hand disappeared, turning into illusory bubbles. In an instant, the entire world became quiet. Time and space seemed to be replaced by a world full of bubbles. In these bubbles, the White Bone Sword Emperor saw his own thoughts, saw himself dodging and resisting. Kai 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 kai. The White Bone Sword Emperor's body spurted out blood. The blood was so beautiful, intertwining with the bubbles. When the transformation reached the limit, the opponent's inner changes would be absorbed. This sword required a certain amount of soul force. Of course, it also contained a trace of the Heart Sword realm. After all, Yi Chen had already reached this realm. Even if he didn't use it intentionally, it would still leave a trace. Chapter 1267. With one sword, the White Bone Sword Emperor was defeated miserably. The omniscient manifestation didn't contain space-time profound, but the five elements profound. Although the five elements profound wasn't as illusory and unavoidable as the space-time profound, it was the most complicated. The five elements reinforced and restrained each other, circulating endlessly. The five elements were the ultimate mutually reinforcing profundities. For example, space-time, yin and yang, light and darkness, as well as the four images, were all composed of 2 or 4 kinds of profounds. Only the 5 elements had 5 mutually restraining profundities, which made them the most complicated and unfathomable. The omniscient manifestation contained the 5 elements profound had reached the pinnacle in terms of transformations. Even the White Bone Sword Emperor, who was proficient in space-time profound, couldn't dodge it. Normally, he could distort space-time and easily escape from the attack's range. Unfortunately, his opponent was Yi Chen, a genius with peerless comprehension. It wasn't without reason that the sovereign of the 3 realms chose Yi Chen. If it was someone else, such as the Golden Robe Emperor or the Purple Robe Emperor, although they were talented enough and much stronger than Yi Chen, they couldn't completely inherit the essence of his martial arts. The inheritance of a legendary sovereign wasn't something that just anyone could inherit. What kind of sword art is this? I can't even see it clearly. If you can see it clearly, you'll have a chance to dodge. It's precisely because you can't see it clearly that you can't dodge it. So powerful. In just a few hundred years, he was able to grasp such a terrifying sword art. The Sword Emperor's position is definitely his. In the eyes of the crowd, Yi Chen's sword was extremely frightening. One had to know that at their level, there were very few things that they couldn't see clearly under the sovereign level. And Yi Chen's sword art was precisely what they couldn't see clearly. I wonder if my Huang Jinyuan can block it. The Golden Robe Emperor smiled bitterly. In terms of offensive methods, Yi Chen had left him far behind. Huang Jinyuan was the strongest defensive martial art of the Golden Sovereign, and it could even protect one's soul. However, this sword was extremely extraordinary. With his Huang Jinyuan realm, the chances of him blocking it were not high. He reckoned that he would still be able to find a loophole. White Bone Sword Emperor, use your sword burial art in the upcoming war between humans and demons. Yi Chen didn't plan to do anything to the White Bone Sword Emperor. Defeating it was enough. The White Bone Sword Emperor glanced at Yi Chen, then fled with a dark expression. He found a secluded place and began to heal his wounds. Yi Chen's sword attack had injured him quite a bit. Even if the latter had stopped in time, the reason why he was in such a hurry to heal was because he couldn't afford to lose face. It would be a lie to say that he didn't hate Yi Chen, but he also knew that whoever's fist was bigger would be the truth. Sword burial art, what an amazing sword art. Yi Chen rejoiced in his heart. The White Bone Sword Emperor had given him a lot of inspiration, especially the sword burial art. After a round of fighting, Yi Chen had already grasped 50% of the essence of the sword burial art. With this, he could easily create another sword burial art. The martial arts in the world were as vast as the sea of stars. There was no martial art that was truly invincible, unless it surpassed the others. Therefore, an additional unique sword art meant an additional method. For example, the omniscient nature might seem powerful, but if the opponent was equally powerful in transformation, the omniscient nature's use would be limited. At that time, the sword burial art would be more useful than the omniscient nature, and vice versa. The exit of the sovereign sacred ground is open. At this moment, a whirlpool in the air started to spin. This was the exit of the sovereign sacred ground. Let's go. This time, I must enter seclusion for a few thousand years to digest the inheritance. There were many inheritances in the sovereign sacred ground. When the time was right, even if one's strength was insufficient, they could still obtain the inheritance. In just a short while, there were only a few people left in the sovereign sacred ground. Yi Chen, I hope that we can meet again in the human-devil battlefield in the future. Du Ju left. Just like his character, he would never say a word more. Flowers bloom and wilt. Every time we meet, you always bring me a shock. I believe the next time will be no exception. Dan Tai Mingyu smiled faintly. She was like a bright moon, entering the whirlpool. Dan Tai Mingyu was an ethereal girl. As time passed, she became more and more similar to Yang Qingxian in certain aspects. They were both so ethereal. Perhaps, they were the same person in their previous life, but in this life, they had become two different people, experiencing two different lives. This battle was very exciting. It also let me see a glorious tomorrow. Chu Zhongtian's eyes were full of longing and battle intent. He was different from others. Others pursued the peak of strength, but he also pursued strength and battle. Therefore, he would not be discouraged. Although the result was important, the process was the most exciting. One by one, they left. In the end, only the golden-robed emperor was left. Yi Chen, where are you going? Seclusion. The golden-robed emperor asked. Yi Chen nodded, it's time. The essence of the Three Realms Supreme's martial arts was like boiling water, rolling around in his mind. If he didn't go into seclusion now, he would waste a lot of inspiration. Me too. The golden-robed emperor nodded and smiled. How about this, 500 years? After 500 years, if you all come out, we will meet at the White Tiger Starfield's Horizon Star. The Horizon Planet was a relatively famous Level 7 life planet in the White Tiger Starfield. Many people liked to gather on the Horizon Planet because there were countless beautiful sceneries on the planet. Okay, see you in 500 years. 500 years should be enough. If even 500 years was not enough, then even 10,000 years would be too little. After all, there was a limit to the Quasi-Supreme. After leaving the Supreme Holy Land, the three returned to Planet Flame. Now, the entire Planet Flame belonged to Yi Chen. Although Flame Star was only a Level 3 planet, it was not small. There were many places suitable for cultivation and seclusion. Of course, Xu Jing would not go into seclusion on Planet Flame. Only in the Dragon Clan could she make full progress. After staying on Planet Flame for a while, Xu Jing returned to Planet Azure Dragon. Your foundation is too weak. In the following time, besides digesting the inheritance, don't forget to build your foundation. Hand in hand, Yi Chen and Murong Qingcheng walked on a path covered with fireworks. This was Flamestar's most famous fire path. Now, it was monopolized by Yi Chen. Only those with his permission could enter. Yeah, I know. But you don't need to worry. Rose Supreme's inheritance is very special. It pays great attention to the foundation. Murong Qingcheng nodded and walked hand in hand with Yi Chen on the fire path. She felt very peaceful. However, if she wanted to accompany Yi Chen to the peak, a peaceful life was impossible. For her, this moment was like an eternity. In the beginning, Yi Chen's seclusion frequency was very high. After coming out, he would immediately practice sword arts and then go back to seclusion. As the Three Realms Supreme's martial arts became more and more profound, Yi Chen's seclusion time grew longer and longer. The longest time he stayed was 30 years, and the longest time he came out was no more than a month. As for his parents and family, Yi Chen no longer had to worry about them. Not long ago, the upper echelons of the human race sent an envoy and gave Yi Chen a jade box. Inside the jade box were 2 life and death fruits. After taking the fruits, his parents smoothly broke through to life and death realm, increasing their lifespan to 100,000 years. As for his younger siblings, they had also broken through to life and death realm a long time ago. Without any worries, Yi Chen had nothing else to worry about, so he threw himself into training wholeheartedly. Chapter 1268. In the blink of an eye, 50 years had passed. Yi Chen's foundation had become more and more stable, and his cultivation base had reached late 8th layer. His body contained boundless sword yuan. At the 8th layer, every small realm required a large amount of accumulation. If one's foundation was weak, it would be difficult to continue breaking through. One had to settle down and train hard. 150 years ago, because Yi Chen had forcibly helped Murong Qingcheng break through to the 8th layer, Murong Qingcheng's foundation was not very stable. She was still at early 8th layer. However, according to Murong Qingcheng, she would be able to break through soon. Presumably, Rose Supreme's inheritance had brought her a lot of benefits. Yi Chen's seclusion was not in a city, but in one of Flamestar's danger zones, Flame Ocean Forest. The Flame Sea Forest was a mystical place. The trees here were all spirit trees, and they were all fire attribute spirit trees. Every now and then, these trees would burn. Countless trees would burn, and it would look like a burning sea of fire. This was how the Flame Sea Forest got its name. In the center of Flame Ocean Forest, the burning trees suddenly froze. Then, the flames instantly extinguished, and the trees immediately withered. Although my sword burial art is different from White Bone Sword Emperor's, its profoundness should be several times stronger than his. Just now, Yi Chen had only released the sword aura of sword burial art. He didn't actually practice sword arts. Otherwise, the entire Flame Ocean Forest might have disappeared. With Yi Chen's current strength, he could also cause great damage to life planets. But, Supreme could destroy life planets. However, the true sword burial art requires the scene of falling petals to be considered to have reached the next level. The upper echelon of the human race didn't just send over 2 life and death fruits, they also sent over a peerless martial art manual. There were countless peerless martial arts recorded in it, and each peerless martial art had either a detailed or simple introduction. The sword burial art was one of the peerless sword arts, and its creator was Paragon Flower Burial. As for the 3 realms killing fist, it was naturally recorded in it as well. Flower burial, sword burial. Yi Chen carefully comprehended. In the blink of an eye, another 10 years passed. Yi Chen, do you dare to fight? On this day, a loud roar reverberated throughout the entirety of Planet Flame. A ripple appeared in space-time. Another person has come to challenge Master. In Sparkle City, a young man raised his head. He was one of the top 4 disciples of Yi Chen, Yang Jianhui. In the past hundreds of years, he had already reached the 7th sky of life and death realm. Among the human geniuses, he was not that outstanding, but he was not bad either. Ever since Master became the Sword Queen, a Sword Dao Emperor has come to challenge him every 10 years. I wonder what kind of big shot it will be this time. Dongfang Bai smiled. Among the 4 disciples of Yi Chen, Lung Xinghan had been wandering outside all year round and rarely came back. Huang Sumei was married, so she rarely came back. The last time she came back, it was to visit Yi Chen with her husband. Only Dongfang Bai and Yang Jianhui spent most of their time on the Flame Star. Occasionally, they would go out. It's finally here. I hope the opponent this time is a bit stronger and can give me some inspiration. In Flame Forest, Yi Chen's figure flickered as he flew toward the source of the voice. In the void near the Flame Star, a tall and sturdy middle-aged man with a huge sword on his back stood there. As he opened his eyes, sword light shot out in all directions, making him look like a peerless, ominous sword. Fierce Sword Emperor, 50,000 years old. He was once a Sword Dao Emperor on the quasi-sovereign list. Swish. A blue figure suddenly appeared. It was indeed Yi Chen. You are Yi Chen? Fierce Sword Emperor sized up Yi Chen. Indeed, you are? Yi Chen nodded inwardly. From the other's temperament, he should be an expert. Although he was not as good as White-Bone Sword Emperor, he should not be too boring. Ya Ning, but people usually call me Fierce Sword Emperor. Ferocious Sword Emperor's expression turned serious. He could sense an intense danger from Yi Chen's body. Make your move. Yi Chen stood with his hands behind his back. Then, you have to be careful. Fierce Sword Emperor pulled out the huge sword on his back, and the sword aura on his body continued to rise. Because the sword aura was too powerful, all the life and death kings within billions of li could feel it. What? It's still rising? The evil Sword Emperor's sword aura seemed to be endless. Even after 15 minutes, he was still climbing, which made all the life and death realm warriors watching the battle on the planet dumbfounded. They couldn't help but worry for Yi Chen. It seems to be a Sword Dao secret art. Yi Chen remained unmoved, allowing Fierce Sword Emperor to increase his sword aura. According to his speculation, the reason why Fierce Sword Emperor's sword aura could rise for such a long time was because he cultivated a Sword Dao secret art that could increase sword aura. After a quarter of an hour, Fierce Sword Emperor's sword aura reached its peak. At this moment, several hundred li around him seemed to have turned into a pitch-black tornado. It was a sword aura, an extremely ferocious and violent sword aura. Although you didn't interrupt my sword aura, I'm not going to be lenient. Fierce Sword Emperor didn't have much confidence before, but now, he was much more confident. Whatever tricks you have, just use them all. Yi Chen said indifferently. I hope you can remain this calm from now on. Kill. With a roar, Fierce Sword Emperor charged toward Yi Chen along with his sword. When he was still several thousand li away from Yi Chen, Fierce Sword Emperor furiously slashed out. The ghostly wails and wolf-like howls rang out. Even though they were very far away, it still made the life and death kings on the Flame Star tremble with fear. Dongfang Bai and Yang Jianhui exchanged a glance, their eyes also filled with fear. What kind of sword art was this? How could it be so frightening? Oh, it contains life and death profound. Yi Chen could tell with a single glance that Fierce Sword Emperor's sword art contained life and death profound. Once the life and death profound was perfected, the martial skill created would also be a supreme martial skill, and an extremely frightening one at that. If the enemy's spirit was weak and their will was weak, they wouldn't even need to fight before their fighting spirit would be directly destroyed. Unfortunately, it's useless for me. I don't intend to study life and death profound at the moment. A person's energy was limited. Once Yi Chen completely digested the essence of the Three Realms Supreme's martial skills, he would perhaps study life and death profound martial skills, but not now. Your luck is not bad. Have a taste of sword burial art. In the past 60 years, Yi Chen had never used sword burial art. This was the first time. Raising his right hand's index and middle fingers, Yi Chen pointed at Fierce Sword Emperor. The wind stopped, and so did Fierce Sword Emperor's sword aura. 1, 2, several petals fell from the void, looking so beautiful and sorrowful. Fierce Sword Emperor's eyes were filled with disbelief as if someone had grabbed his neck. Even after Yi Chen left, Fierce Sword Emperor still had lingering fear. This sword was countless times more frightening than his fierce sword. At that moment, he even had the thought of suicide. Frightening Sword Emperor. Deeply looking at the place where Yi Chen disappeared, Fierce Sword Emperor turned around and flew away. In this life, he didn't intend to challenge Yi Chen anymore. The title of Sword Emperor could be taken by anyone, and it had nothing to do with him. Chapter 1269. When using the burial sword art, the more petals there were, the more profound the burial sword art was. According to the records, when Supreme Burial Flower used the burial sword art, there were hundreds of petals. Yi Chen naturally couldn't compare to Supreme Burial Flower. When he used the burial sword art, there were only 4 or 5 petals. However, this was already very frightening. Back then, the White Bone Sword Emperor's burial sword art was far inferior to Yi Chen's, and could only be considered superficial. Time flew by, and 40 years passed in the blink of an eye. 5 elements sword arts are broad and profound. Before, my foundation was not enough, and the 5 elements sword arts I created were very immature. Now that I have the essence of the 3 realms supreme's martial skills, it's enough to greatly improve the 5 elements sword arts. Be it in terms of profoundness or power, the burial sword art had already far surpassed the 5 elements sword arts. Yi Chen naturally couldn't favor one over the other. He wanted to make the 5 elements sword art into an even more powerful sword art, a super sword art that focused both offense and defense. First was a defensive sword art. Yi Chen was prepared to fuse the rise and fall sword art into this defensive sword art. After all, although rise and fall sword art was exquisite, it could only weaken the enemy's attack. In terms of defense, it was still quite lacking. If he could fuse it with a defensive sword art, weakening while defending, it would undoubtedly make the enemy despair. Of course, the prerequisite was to first create a defensive sword art and then fuse it. Qingxian, come and attack me. In the starry sky far away from Planet Flame, Yi Chen and Yang Qingxian faced each other. Yang Qingxuan's visit was something Yi Chen didn't expect, even though she only came to see Yang Fengfeng and the disciples of the mysterious sect. At this time, Yi Chen had just created a 5 elements defensive sword art. With Yang Qingxuan's strength, it couldn't be better for her to test out a defensive sword art. All right. Yang Qingxian nodded. For the first attack, Yang Qingxian used a palm art. The palm art was ethereal and swift, containing the profound of yin and yang. Puff. However, the moment this palm technique came into contact with Yi Chen's defensive sword technique, it immediately collapsed. For the second attack, Yang Qingxian didn't use a normal martial art. Instead, it was a sealing martial art. This sealing martial art was called Yin-Yang Destruction Mirror. Yi Chen felt the time and space around him change. In the next second, he appeared in a black and white world. The black and white air flowed continuously and eventually turned into a Tai Chi. From the outside, it looked like a yin-yang mirror had appeared in the starry sky. Bang! The yin-yang mirror shattered and disappeared. Amazing, first sealing the enemy, then annihilating the enemy along with the seal. How could Yi Chen not see through the profoundness of this move? If it were an ordinary person, they wouldn't be able to do anything. However, the 5 elements defensive sword art could defend against it. Yang Qingxian couldn't instantly seal Yi Chen, so she could only seal the time and space where Yi Chen was. Therefore, Yi Chen could still use sword arts. Seeing that even the yin-yang destruction mirror couldn't break Yi Chen's defensive sword art, Yang Qingxian knew that she had to use her true power. In these 100 years after leaving the supreme sacred land, she had already digested a portion of Old Man Heaven's will's martial essence. The remaining ones were more profound, and she couldn't digest them with her current realm. She could only leave them for later. This life and death heaven will palm of mine took me 100 years to create. Be careful. Besides the yin and yang profound, Yang Qingxian was also proficient in life and death profound. Life and death heaven will palm? Yi Chen looked pensive. Swoosh. It was only a single movement, but Yang Qingxuan's entire aura had changed completely. Her life force was vibrating intensely, dropping to the lowest point one moment and then rising to the highest point the next. There was a kind of unpredictable aura of life and death. Besides that, Yi Chen also sensed a familiar power. That was heart power. He didn't expect Yang Qingxian to have comprehended heart power. Old Man Heaven's will capturing hand was similar to Paragon of Three Realms killing fist. They both contained heart power. The difference was that Paragon of Three Realms had completely integrated heart power into his fist art, increasing its power. As for Old Man Heaven's will, he used his heart to replace Heaven's heart, increasing his technique. Swoosh, swoosh. Before Yang Qingxian waved her palm, there were already 2 palm winds flying towards Yi Chen. These palm winds were extremely powerful and contained the power of life and death. A barren planet nearby was merely brushed by the palm winds, and it immediately turned into dust as though it had been eroded by the wind. An even further broken planet suddenly erupted with boundless vitality, and when the vitality reached the limit, it exploded violently. Extreme life was death. Extreme death was nothingness. As for Yi Chen's 5-element sword art, there was an imperceptible pause. It seems like I have to go all out. Yi Chen had never underestimated Yang Qingxian. In Elysium, she didn't put all her focus on martial arts and was involved in many aspects. One should know that a person's energy was limited, and it was impossible to be number one in all aspects. However, there were benefits to being involved in too many aspects, and that was comprehending by analogy. Now, it was time for Yang Qingxian to explode. Her improvement speed even shocked Yi Chen. Go. Accumulating her palm to the limit, Yang Qingxian slowly struck out with her right hand. Hoo 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 hoo. The overlapping palm winds were either real or fake, and they covered the sky and covered Yi Chen. It was impossible for Yi Chen to dodge them. Of course, he didn't need to dodge them. This time, he was testing the defense of 5-element sword art. Life and death were similar to the rise and fall of times. 5-element sword art started to become unstable. Occasionally, the palm winds would suddenly erupt, and it was impossible to grasp its pattern. Pop. In the end, Yi Chen's 5-element sword art collapsed. Of course, Yang Qingxian's life and death heaven's will palm had reached its limit, and it could only push Yi Chen thousands of miles away. In terms of using heart power, Yang Qingxian was still not as good as Yi Chen. Otherwise, she wouldn't have pushed Yi Chen thousands of miles away. She would have been able to hurt Yi Chen more or less. Congratulations. In the future war between humans and demons, I hope we can fight together. Yi Chen smiled and flew over. Of course. Yang Qingxian nodded. After staying in Flamestar for a year, Yang Qingxian left. During this year, Yi Chen had completely perfected 5-element sword art. What he needed to do next was to fuse the 5-element sword art and rise and fall of 5-element sword art together to create a more ultimate 5-element sword art. Yi Chen had a premonition that this would be a huge project, and it would be many times more difficult than the sword burial art. But once it was created, Yi Chen's overall strength would skyrocket. 30 years passed. 80 years passed. In the blink of an eye, 200 years had passed since he left Supreme Sacred Land. Too difficult. I haven't even reached half of it. The difficulty of fusing the 5-element sword art and rise and fall of 5-element sword art was beyond Yi Chen's imagination. The 5-element profoundness contained in the 5-element sword art was very stable, but the 5-element profoundness contained in the rise and fall of 5-element sword art focused on changes in levels. The two couldn't be reconciled to a certain extent. If Yi Chen didn't have the martial arts essence of the Three Realms Paragon, he would have given up long ago. Chapter 1270. When he couldn't figure it out, Yi Chen would practice other sword arts. In these 80 years, the sword burial art had risen from 4 or 5 petals to over a dozen petals. And in terms of variations, Yi Chen could instantly slash out 999,990 swords, making boundless phenomenon even more unfathomable. As for Death Cleave, Yi Chen had gone through over 100 modifications and had erased over 3,000 flaws. As for how many flaws there were, Yi Chen didn't know. All he knew was that as his sword art boundary rose, he would see more and more flaws. This wasn't the beginning nor was it the end. Fused sword arts. Sword burial art. Boundless phenomenon. Death cleave. And 5-element slash. 5 different sword arts were perfected one after another. Faintly, Yi Chen could already see the road to becoming a supreme being. Demon region, God-blessed planet. God-blessed planet was a life planet that the high-level demons bestowed upon the God-blessed queen. It wasn't originally called God-blessed planet, but that wasn't important. What was important was that it was now called God-blessed planet. The God-blessed queen was no longer the God-blessed queen, but the God-blessed empress. Ever since she left the land of divinity and demons, she had already defeated numerous quasi-exalts of the demons. Her reputation had skyrocketed, and she was one of the 5 young quasi-exalts of the demons. She was ranked 2nd on the quasi-exalt ranking, the celestial demon sovereign ranked 5th, the 4-winged dragon sovereign ranked 12th, the wolf sovereign ranked 12th, and the heaven-swallowing demon sovereign ranked 18th. However, she wasn't satisfied with her current achievements. She was well aware that Yi Chen's progress wouldn't be any slower than hers. In the high-level hunting grounds, the impression that Yi Chen gave her was far too deep. If she didn't defeat him, she would never be able to erase it. Vast and boundless golden wings spread out. With a gentle flap, the God-blessed empress instantly vanished from God-blessed planet. Heaven-swallowing star. The high-level demons bestowed this life planet to the heaven-swallowing demon sovereign. On this day, endless darkness covered most of Heaven-swallowing star, causing the countless demons on Heaven-swallowing star to fall into an unprecedented panic. Some demon kings who hadn't seen the world even thought that the demon sovereign had arrived. God bless Empress, what do you mean? A loud roar pierced through the 9 heavens. Next, a figure shot out from the largest city of the heaven-swallowing star. At first, it was just a black dot, but very quickly, the black dot turned into a giant that was 100,000 miles in size. His belly was especially big, and his eyes were like the sun and moon. His roar was like thunder, and there was an iron ring on each of his earlobes. Heaven-devouring demon monarch, it's nothing much. I just want to exchange a few moves with you. The clear and melodious voice was devoid of any emotion. Since you're overestimating yourself, I'll fulfill your wish. Follow me to the heaven-devouring ruins. The heaven-devouring ruins was a ruin tens of billions of miles away from the heaven-devouring planet, and it was also under the control of the heaven-devouring Devil Emperor. The commotion caused by the battle between the two was too great, and only the heaven-devouring ruins was suitable as a battlefield. With a teleportation, the two arrived at the heaven-devouring ruins. Withdrawing her wings, the God-bless Empress stood on a piece of floating debris. The aura on her body was vast and sacred. She did not look like someone from the demons at all, but more like a messenger from God. Meanwhile, the heaven-devouring demon monarch did not shrink his body size, and he still maintained the size of 100,000 miles. His title was the heaven-devouring demon monarch. The bigger his body size, the more advantage he had. God bless Empress, it has only been 200 years, and you can't help but challenge me. It seems like the consecutive victories have clouded your intelligence. Don't forget that I've even fought with the Wolf Monarch before. The Wolf Monarch that he spoke of was the Wolf Monarch ranked 12th on the quasi-venerable list. He was definitely a ruthless character. The stronger you are, the happier I'll be. Enough with the nonsense. Let's fight. The God bless Empress did not have the time to waste with the heaven-devouring demon monarch. What she wanted was a battle. She wanted the comprehension and experience that the battle would bring. Martial arts that had not been tempered could only be seen and not used. The golden wings spread out again. This time, the wings did not extend to the horizon, and only expanded to about 100 meters. Together with her slender and graceful body, she looked like a goddess. She put her hands together, and circles of golden rings of light rushed out. These golden rings of light were like ripples, expanding continuously. When they got close to the heaven-devouring demon monarch, they had already enveloped the sky and the ground. Heaven-devouring roar. The heaven-devouring demon monarch took a deep breath. This breath was very intense, and even the golden rings of light wavered. Tornadoes were sucked into the heaven-devouring demon monarch's mouth. At the next moment, the heaven-devouring demon monarch's face flushed red, and he let out a deafening roar. The golden rings of light shattered inch by inch. Heaven-devouring demon monarch, have a taste of the light and darkness fist that I've prepared for you. The golden wings on her back flapped, and the God bless Empress's speed instantly reached the speed of light. She disdained teleportation. Although teleportation was faster than the speed of light, it couldn't increase her might. At their level, teleportation was useless at times. What was needed was a fair and square attack. Like an aurora cutting across the starry sky, the God bless Empress punched out. This punch wasn't dazzling, but it wasn't dim either. It was maintained at a perfect balance, as if the purest light and the purest darkness were fused together. Heaven-devouring earth. The heaven-devouring demon monarch felt an unprecedented threat. The light and darkness fist from the God bless Empress wasn't particularly flashy, but it was undoubtedly very close to the truth of the world. The four ultimacies of earth, water, fire, and wind were operating, and the heaven-devouring demon monarch performed his ultimate move, heaven-devouring earth. A small black hole appeared. No matter how small a black hole was, it was still a black hole. To a certain extent, this was the technique of an honorable. The heaven-devouring demon monarch attempted to devour the God bless Empress. As for her life and death, he wasn't concerned because he couldn't control this move himself. Without a sound, the God bless Empress disappeared into the black hole and into the heaven-devouring demon monarch's stomach. God bless Empress, you shouldn't have challenged me. What a pity. The heaven-devouring demon monarch shook his head secretly. There weren't many among the younger generation of the demons who dared to challenge him because they knew how terrifying his heaven-devouring earth was. Heaven-devouring demon monarch, aren't you celebrating too early? At this moment, the back of the heaven-devouring demon monarch exploded all of a sudden. Blood rained down while the God bless Empress dashed out. You actually broke through my heaven-devouring earth? The heaven-devouring demon monarch turned his head slowly with a look of disbelief. After defeating the heaven-devouring demon monarch, the God bless Empress' reputation among the demons grew. Some even secretly believed that the God bless Empress would become one of the strongest people in the history of the Dark Goddess bloodline. She would become the right-hand man of the great Demon King bloodline. Yi Chen, don't make me feel bored. On the God bless planet, the God bless Empress looked in the direction of the four major lifestar zones. Time passed by slowly. In the blink of an eye, there were only 150 years left until the 500-year deadline. 5 elements sword art will decline after reaching its peak. Inside a barren lifestar, Yi Chen danced his sword art in a frenzy. As his sword art danced, the energy of the lifestar continued to collapse and weaken. With a boom, the huge lifestar exploded. Once the violent shockwaves got close to Yi Chen, they would be weakened to 100th or 1,000th of their original strength. Chapter 1271. Not only did Zenith Decline contain a powerful defense, but it was also more than 10 times stronger than Zenith Decline in terms of weakening external attacks. However, there was always a loss. Apart from weakening external attacks, Zenith Decline could also strengthen the power of one's sword technique. Zenith Decline did not have this effect. It was extremely extreme. However, for Yi Chen, what he truly needed was Peak Decline. Peak Decline was a bit weak, but the weakening wasn't too severe, and the strengthening of his sword arts wasn't too powerful either. Average development meant mediocrity, so he might as well focus on one point. With Peak Decline, Yi Chen could be considered an ultimate sword artist among quasi-sovereigns. He could both attack and defend, and had no weaknesses. Combined with Heart Sword Realm, even a desolate life planet couldn't bear it. It should be known that the range of Peak Decline was not fixed, and completely depended on Yi Chen's will. When it was small, he only needed to protect himself. When it was large, it could cover a radius of 10 million li. Once one entered this range, it would already be good if the enemy could display even half of their strength. At the border of Black Tortoise Starfield and White Tiger Starfield, there was a huge floating meteorite. 2 figures were sitting on it, playing chess. True Marshal Supreme, I didn't expect you to dare come. Admirable. The person on the opposite side raised his head. It was the number 1 supreme of the demons, Sky Demon Sovereign. At this moment, the two didn't emit any supreme aura, and looked like two ordinary kings. True Martial Supreme placed a white chess piece and said indifferently, "Why not? Aren't you afraid that I'll set a trap to kill you?" The Sky Demon Sovereign had 2 divine artifacts. One was the Sky Demon Sacred Armor, and the other was the Bloodlust Spear. The divine artifacts were refined from the fusion of paragon weapons with divine stones. They were many times more powerful than paragon weapons, and the True Martial Sovereign only had the True Martial Divine Gem. Celestial Demon Sovereign was confident that he could kill Supreme True Martial in a protracted battle. Of course, it had to be a protracted battle, so if he wanted to kill Supreme True Martial, he had to set up a formation to trap him. Hee. True Martial Supreme smiled, "You can try." With that, his right hand stretched forward, and the white chess piece fell. Sky Demon Sovereign sized up True Martial Supreme's wrist, his eyes suddenly squinted, and he laughed heartily. As expected of Supreme Martial Sage, he was able to find a sacred artifact in just a few hundred years. Impressive. Previously, Celestial Demon Sovereign didn't pay attention to it. But just now, when Supreme True Martial was playing chess, part of his wrist was exposed, revealing the golden scales. With Celestial Demon Sovereign's eyesight, he could tell at a glance that the scales contained the power of a saint artifact. The power of a saint artifact was very special, so it couldn't be forged. How could it be that easy to obtain a saint tool? This is just a defective one. Of course, I am still very confident in its might. How about we have a spar? Supreme True Martial's eyes were filled with fighting spirit. Celestial Archdevil stared fixedly at Supreme True Martial. Initially, he wanted to probe Supreme True Martial, but now that Supreme True Martial said he wanted to spar, he hesitated. The demons had always been paranoid, even after becoming a Supreme. Celestial Archdevil waved his hand. "This time, I'm not looking for you for anything else, it's about the Azura world." Azura world? Supreme True Martial's brows creased. The Azura world was not a world of life. According to the records, it was an arena created by the Azura god. In the Azura world, every time one won a battle, they would be rewarded with a drop of Azura spring water. The Azura spring water contained a mysterious substance that could help a quasi-venerable step into the 9th layer of life and death realm, which was also the supremacy realm. The more Azura spring water one had, the higher the success rate. "You want to open Azura world?" Supreme True Martial looked at Celestial Demon Sovereign. "Right, it's about time. Give me an explanation." In truth, Supreme True Martial didn't want to open the Azura world. No one knew when it started, but the Devil race and the human race each controlled a yin-yang Azura stone. Only when the yin-yang Azura stone was combined could the Azura world be opened. It had been 100,000 years since the last time the Azura world was opened, and the consequence was that more than half of the human race's geniuses died. Celestial Demon Sovereign smiled. "Within 500 years, don't you think this explanation is enough?" Supreme True Martial said, "You think I'll believe you? You have no choice but to believe me. Supreme Golden Buddha hasn't recovered yet, right? So what? It was just a small war. We, the demons, have been able to suppress you humans for so many years. We didn't rely on a few advantages. You should know this yourself." Seeing that Supreme True Martial was silent, Celestial Demon Sovereign continued, "Opening Azura world is beneficial to both of us. I'll give you some time to consider, but I hope it won't take too long." Celestial Demon Sovereign stood up, ready to leave. Supreme True Martial didn't stand up to send him off. All of a sudden, a long spear appeared in Celestial Demon Sovereign's hand and he thrust it at Supreme True Martial. The spear was so fast that even time and space vanished in the face of this spear. Ding! Supreme True Martial was sent flying backward. Celestial Demon Sovereign, what are you trying to do? Supreme True Martial bellowed. "Just kidding." Celestial Demon Sovereign smirked, but in his heart, he thought, "It really is a sage-level inner armor." The power of the bloodlust spear can't penetrate it. Forget it, now is not the time to fight. Let's open Azura world first. As he spoke, Celestial Demon Sovereign's body flickered and disappeared without a trace. Supreme True Marshal's face darkened as he touched the place where he was hit. He stood in the starry sky and pondered for a long time. After an unknown period of time, Supreme True Marshal turned around and disappeared. He's not injured. Looks like it's a sage-level inner armor. In the starry sky, a faintly discernible voice came from a black chess piece floating in the sky. Then, the black chess piece exploded and turned into nothingness. True Marshal Star, True Marshal Grand Hall. Fat. Supreme True Marshal's figure appeared in the inner chamber of the True Marshal Grand Hall. He spat out a mouthful of blood. Supreme True Marshal's face was pale. Such a domineering bloodlust spear. The Royal Carp inner armor can only block 90% of its power. In fact, Supreme True Marshal did not lie to Celestial Demon Sovereign. The sage-level inner armor he wore was indeed a defective one. The reason why he suggested a spar was because he wanted to make use of Celestial Demon Sovereign's suspicious nature to deter him from acting rashly. As for the last spear attack, Supreme True Marshal had already anticipated it. Celestial Demon Sovereign was a suspicious person and would definitely probe the opponent. However, Supreme True Marshal did not expect the spear to be so fast. It seemed like Celestial Demon Sovereign had unearthed more of the Bloodlust Spear's potential. The demons are ambitious. It's not a good time to fight in the near future. I can only open Azura world. Supreme Zhenwu sighed. It was said that the human race had amazing geniuses, but who knew that the human race had always been walking on a tightrope? Once there was a shortage of talents, the human race would be completely suppressed by the demon race. Since ancient times, the human race might have had the upper hand, but they had never had the absolute upper hand. Azura world might be an opportunity. I hope I'm not digging my own grave. Chapter 1272. Yi Chen didn't manage to enter seclusion for 500 years. On the 360th year, Azura world opened. Let's experience the legendary Azura world. On this day, Yi Chen brought Murong Qingcheng to Spirit Realm. Spirit Realm was the life starfield where old ancestor Wuling resided. It was only 1/20th the size of White Tiger Starfield. Unfortunately, Azura world was right next to Spirit Realm. As far as the eye could see, a bronze gate over 100 billion li tall towered in the starry sky. Compared to it, life planets were minuscule, and ordinary planets were like specks of dust. The bronze gate was covered in rust. The gate had already opened, revealing a crimson whirlpool. So this is Azura Gate. So huge. I didn't expect to see Azura Gate enter Azura world. This life has not been in vain. It's said that one can obtain a drop of Azura Spring for every win in Azura world. I'm not here to look. With the Azura Spring, I'll have a chance to become a sovereign in the future. As soon as Azura world opened, an endless stream of 8th layer life and death heavenly kings rushed over. Demon race, human race, evil spirit race, Yaksha race, giant race, barbarian race, spirit race. The 8th layer life and death heavenly kings of every major race in the universe rushed over. Among them were newbies who had just entered the 8th layer, as well as quasi-sovereigns who had lingered at the peak for tens of thousands of years. The former came to broaden their horizons, but there was no lack of ambitious people who wanted to win a few battles and obtain a few drops of Azura Spring to build a foundation for the future. The latter, on the other hand, wanted to break through the limit of one's lifespan and become a sovereign. There were simply too many old monsters who had stopped at the peak of quasi-sovereign realm. Nobody wanted to die, and there were only two ways to stay alive. One was to obtain a treasure that could increase one's lifespan, and the other was to break through to the 9th layer and become a sovereign. Compared to the former, the latter was undoubtedly more attractive. After all, treasures that could increase one's lifespan were too hard to find. It could be said that all the old monsters couldn't help but rush over. Whether the youngsters on the quasi-sovereign list could withstand the impact of the old monsters was still unknown. Swish, swish, swish. One figure after another entered the bronze gate like moths flying into a flame. There are so many people. Looking at the sea of people outside the bronze gate, Murong Qingcheng frowned. The Azura spring water is something that can only be found by luck. No one will give it up. As for the Azura spring water, Yi Chen was also determined to obtain it. After 360 years of cultivation, his cultivation base had long reached the peak of life and death realm, and his foundation was extremely solid. Without any external help, he was confident that he could become a supreme expert within 1,000 years. If he could obtain enough Azura spring water, the time would be greatly reduced. It should be known that the greatest use of Azura spring water was to improve one's foundation. The Jade Spirit Emperor is here. What a powerful aura! A voice suddenly came from the crowd. Yi Chen looked over. Unbeknownst to him, a few young men had appeared hundreds of thousands of miles away. The young man in the lead had a tall and straight posture. The corners of his body were very hard, as if they had been carved by knives and axes. Jade Spirit Emperor, ranked 9th on the quasi-venerable list, a super genius of the spirit race. Let's go in first. Yi Chen said to Murong Qingcheng. Yes. Murong Qingcheng nodded. Sure. The two shot toward the crimson whirlpool in the bronze gate. Interesting. Sizing up Yi Chen's back, the corner of Jade Spirit Emperor's mouth curved into a smile. Jade Spirit Emperor, this time, it's time for you to prove yourself. The young man beside Jade Spirit Emperor said respectfully. Don't look down on others. The world is so big, and no one can guarantee that they will always be number one. Jade Spirit Emperor stood with his hands clasped behind his back and said indifferently. Another young man said, your Jade Soul True Body has already reached the 7th layer. Apart from a few people, I'm afraid the others won't even be able to harm a hair of yours. Jade Soul True Body was one of the 3 great body refining martial skills of the spirit race. It was a lot weaker than the 9th Golden Body, but it still couldn't be underestimated. When cultivated to the extreme, even a black hole would find it hard to destroy it. You'll know when the time comes. Jade Spirit Emperor didn't put the young man's words in his heart. How could a frog at the bottom of a well see the brilliance of the outside world? As time passed, more and more 8th layer life and death heavenly kings arrived. 3 groups of demons arrived. The first group was led by a young man with a wolf's head and a human's body. The second group was led by God-blessed queen, and the third group was led by a black-haired young man with a frightening aura. The young man from the evil spirit race with the huge cross-shaped sword on his back left a very deep impression. His gaze swept across the crowd, and no one dared to meet his eyes. It was as if his gaze could not only see through everyone's secrets, but even their fates. A black-cloaked young sword emperor appeared from the Yaksha race. He was a young golden giant of the giant race, a 2-headed 4-armed giant. Apart from the frightening young quasi-sovereigns, some old monsters were even more astonishing. Nobody knew how so many old monsters existed. Some of them were even rumored to be dead. For example, the sobbing blood-old man of the evil spirit race was said to have lived for a whole 120,000 years. The old guys are coming out one after another. That's good too. My sword burial art just happens to be lacking a sacrificial offering. The white-boned sword emperor looked at an old guy who had become famous before him and sneered. In the past 360 years, he had cultivated the sword burial art to a higher level. He could already create the scene of falling flower petals. Apart from this, his white bone light slash and white bone time sword arts had also reached a new level. He was confident that he could defeat Yi Chen with one sword strike. Passing through the crimson whirlpool, Yi Chen and Murong Qingcheng arrived at an incomparably vast arena. The boundaries of this arena couldn't be seen, and its boundless aura was enough to make any arrogant person calm down. Before the power of gods, mortals could only lower their heads. This was not shameful. The arena was like an enlarged version of the Roman Colosseum. The spectator stands were densely packed, and without exception, they were all at the 8th layer of life and death realm. Yi Chen. Xu Jing's voice came. Let's go. Yi Chen saw Xu Jing. Beside Xu Jing sat the great elder celestial crystal dragon emperor, Golden River Dragon Emperor, and the others. Seeing Yi Chen, Celestial Crystal Dragon Emperor and the others were deeply moved. The seemingly weak youngster in front of them had now become an existence they could only look up to. It had to be said that time could change everything. A huge hourglass hung above the arena. The sand continuously flowed down, and when the sand flowed out, the arena would begin. A smile appeared on Yi Chen's face. He saw Dugu Ju and the others. He wondered how much they had improved in the past few hundred years. At their level, the seemingly huge gap was actually not that big. Everything depended on one's potential. Chapter 1273. Yi Chen wasn't sure how many martial emperors there were from the various races, but he could guess it just by looking at the sea of people in the arena. The funnel-shaped arena was clearly divided into several factions. There were the demons, the evil spirit race, the Yakshaw race, the green men race, and the other races from the Demons Alliance. There were also the human race, the giant race, the barbarian race, and the other races from the Human Races Alliance. Other than them, there were some neutral races that hadn't expressed their stance yet, such as the spirit race, the tail race, and the spectre race. Yi Chen, you're already here. Suddenly, the golden-robed emperor's voice came from not far away. The current golden-robed emperor's aura was stronger than before, and his eyes were filled with confidence. It was obvious that he had improved a lot in the past 360 years. I've just arrived. There were many seats beside Yi Chen, and he extended a hand to invite the golden-robed emperor over. Sitting beside Yi Chen, the golden-robed emperor smiled. I originally planned to gather 500 years later, but I didn't expect it to be brought forward by 140 years. How lively. Almost all the martial emperors and quasi-martial sovereigns from the various races are here. It is indeed lively. Yi Chen nodded. More and more people gathered in the spectator stands, and judging from the speed at which the hourglass was flowing, it would probably take 3 days for the sand to flow out. The next day, Yang Qingxian arrived. The third day, Arju and Lung Feifen arrived. Soon, it was the morning of the fourth day. In the sky above the arena, the last trace of sand had flowed out of the hourglass. As the sand flowed out, a spring appeared out of nowhere. The spring water was pink and translucent, as if it was carved from a pink diamond. Seeing this pink spring water, everyone's eyes turned red. Just like the records, the Azura spring water was pink. A single drop of Azura spring water could save them 100 years of hard work, so how many drops of spring water was there? Other than the Azura spring water, a stone tablet appeared in the sky, and the rules were written on it. You can forfeit 3 times. Forfeit 3 times? Interesting. Yi Chen fell into deep thought. The golden-robed emperor smiled. Looks like we'll have to stay in this arena for a year and a half. Dong. The war drums that had not sounded for countless years rang out, and the atmosphere in the wrestling arena instantly changed. The fiery atmosphere was filled with hot-bloodedness and bloodlust. At this moment, the majority of people only had victory in their eyes. It's about to start. Murong Qingcheng was also affected by the atmosphere. Her palms were sweaty, and a faint fragrance wafted from her sweat. Swish, 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 a total of 18 red pillars of light shot towards the spectator stands. The emperor, who was enveloped by the red pillars of light, appeared in the arena at almost the same time. At this moment, the arena had been divided into 9 sections, and 9 battles could be held. Kill. The 9 matches began simultaneously. After half a cup of tea's time, out of the 18 people, only 6 were still alive. The other 12 had either been killed or had taken each other down with them. The bitter battle situation woke many people from their stupor. The Azura spring water was good, but one had to be alive to enjoy it. The sound of the war drums was too strange, it could actually affect their minds. I forfeit. The second round of battles began, and 2 people forfeited. Sensing their voices, the red pillar of light teleported them back to the spectator stands. As for their opponents who won without a fight, they could directly obtain a drop of Azura spring water. In the 5th round, Yi Chen's heart tightened. This time, there was Murong Qingcheng. Fortunately, Her opponent was not too powerful, only at mid-8th layer life and death realm. Without any surprise or danger, Murong Qingcheng obtained victory. As for her opponent being a human, she also managed to preserve her life. Of course, one could forfeit 3 times, but as long as one didn't forfeit, the loser would be directly expelled from the Azura world. Is this the Azura spring water? Sizing up that pink diamond-like drop of Azura spring water in Murong Qingcheng's palm, Yi Chen released his soul power, wanting to analyze it. However, no matter how profound his soul power was, he couldn't analyze the mysteries of the Azura spring water, because all of its essence had been sealed. Moreover, the Azura spring water had been contaminated with Murong Qingcheng's life aura, making it impossible to transfer. Only Murong Qingcheng could use it. Let's take it first, Yi Chen said. All right. With a wave of her hand, Murong Qingcheng melted the Azura spring water and entered her body. A red light flickered, and without any reason, Murong Qingcheng's aura rose by a notch. Her foundation became more stable, and some useless demonic power impurities were directly evaporated. The impurities in her soul were also erased. Indeed worthy of being called Azura spring water. Seeing Murong Qingcheng's transformation, Yi Chen sighed inwardly. Although 1 drop of Azura spring water did not seem to have a heaven-defying effect, it still saved 100 years of bitter cultivation. Of course, this was the case for ordinary people. For Murong Qingcheng, with Rose Supreme's inheritance, 20 to 30 years of cultivation could have such an effect. For Yi Chen, it might only take 10 years. Unknowingly, 3 months passed. The spectator stands had become much sparser. Some were directly killed, some were half-dead, and some were expelled from the Azura world. Some of the better ones had forfeited 3 times. In these 3 months, the number of people in the spectator stands had decreased to only 1% of the original number. Of course, the number was still not small. During this period, Yi Chen participated in 10 matches and won 10 of them, obtaining 10 drops of Azura spring water in total. 10 drops of Azura spring water had strengthened Yi Chen's foundation to an unimaginable level. His cultivation base had reached the peak of peak 8th layer life and death realm, and he could become a sovereign at any time. Of course, becoming a sovereign not only required a solid foundation, but also a kind of heavenly Tao comprehension. Otherwise, even if he could break through to the sovereign realm, he would be struck to death by the universe's heavenly tribulation. Wanting to become a sovereign was not that easy. Otherwise, there wouldn't be so many old fogies stuck at this threshold. Murong Qingcheng's improvement was even greater than Yi Chen's. She had obtained a total of 12 drops of Azura spring water, and her foundation had undergone an earth-shaking transformation. She no longer had any hidden dangers, and her current cultivation base had also reached late 8th layer life and death realm, only a step away from the peak. As long as her luck was not bad, reaching peak 8th layer life and death realm was just a matter of time. Buzz! A beam of red light shrouded Yi Chen, and in the next moment, Yi Chen appeared at the center of the arena. His opponent was a blood-haired old man, a quasi-sovereign of the Yaksha race. Junior, you're dead for sure now that you've fallen into this old man's hands. Seeing that Yi Chen did not give up, a sinister expression flickered on the blood-haired old man's face. He knew of Yi Chen's identity, and he was very happy to kill such a genius. Perhaps, the higher-ups of the Yaksha race would even reward him with some life-extending treasures. This Yi Chen is out of luck. Bloodbone is not an ordinary quasi-sovereign. Bloodbone Old Man had been famous for a long time, and he was almost 90,000 years old this year. Ordinary quasi-sovereigns were not his opponent at all. If not for the fact that he had been in seclusion for the past few years, he would definitely have a place on the quasi-sovereign list. Of course, the other king-level experts still did not know that Yi Chen had the title of Sword Emperor. Otherwise, they would not have said such words. Die, Bloodbone Divine Palm. Bloodbone Old Man's palm struck at Yi Chen, layer upon layer of palm prints resembling a sea of blood. You're the one who's going to die. Yi Chen pulled out his sword and slightly shook it. Immediately, the space-time in front of him was sliced into millions of pieces, and Bloodbone Old Man's body seemed to have fallen apart, turning into countless blood-colored cubes. Chapter 1274. After 360 years of cultivation, Yi Chen had found more than 9,000 loopholes in the death cut. After erasing them, the death cut was the true death cut, which was billions of times more precise than the most precise scalpel. In Yi Chen's eyes, Old Man Bloodbone was merely a corpse waiting to be dissected. With a suction force, Old Man Bloodbone's storage ring fell into Yi Chen's hand. In the arena, the loser's wealth might not be any less than the Azura spring water. This is ridiculous. I remember this kid is not even 600 years old. Humph. Let him be arrogant for a while longer. When he meets a powerful opponent, he will still die. That's right. Our Demon Sky Demon Emperor, Four-Winged Dragon Emperor, God Bless Queen, and Wolf Emperor can kill him easily. Apart from that, some of our seniors are also very unfathomable. A mere Yi Chen is not worth mentioning. Yi Chen's talent and comprehension were well known among all the races. Shaman Demon Emperor had even predicted his future. Unfortunately, several assassination plans had failed. This time, the Demon Supremes were also planning to deal with Yi Chen in the arena. Of course, opening the Shura world was not entirely to deal with Yi Chen. Yi Chen was only a small factor, which was not enough to affect everyone's hearts. With Old Man Bloodbone as an example, many demi-sovereigns chose to directly give up when facing Yi Chen. Not to mention the emperors, Yi Chen could kill them with a single breath. Yi Chen was not the only one who was dazzling. Some powerful demi-sovereigns began to stand out. There were young demi-sovereigns and old demi-sovereigns. The later it was, the more powerful the ones who remained were. There are a lot less people. Golden-robed Emperor scanned the crowd and found that there were less than 1,000 demi-sovereigns left in the audience. Yi Chen said, "The real battle has just begun." In the blink of an eye, half a year had passed since they arrived in the Hell Azura world. Every day, the sea of people in the spectator stands would decrease in number. Most of the participants had forfeited 3 times and were expelled from the Hell Azura world. There were also quite a number of people who had died. If it was any other time, the various races would definitely be heartbroken. But now, everyone was calm. After all, death had occurred so frequently that they had long become numb to it. As the number of people dropped below 1,000, the duels in the arena became more intense. Very few people would give up unless the difference in strength between the two sides was too great. Be careful. If you can't handle it, just give up. Yi Chen reminded Murong Qingcheng and Xu Jing. Murong Qingcheng's foundation was becoming more and more stable, but in terms of talent, she was still a little lacking. It would be very dangerous for her to encounter those at the top of the Quasi-Venerables list or those old monsters who had been famous for a long time. As for Xu Jing's progress, Yi Chen wasn't too sure, but he couldn't help but worry. Once a fight started in the arena, there would basically be deaths. It was extremely cruel. "Don't worry. I know what I'm doing." Xu Jing nodded. The arena was no longer divided. It became a one-on-one battle. This time, the White Bone Sword Emperor and a powerful Quasi-Venerables from the Yaksha race appeared in the arena. "Have a taste of my sword burial art." The opponent was very strong. They fought for dozens of rounds, but there was no clear winner. The White Bone Sword Emperor had no choice but to use his trump card, the sword burial art. Several petals fell from the void, and the opponent couldn't move at all. He was killed with one sword strike. The White Bone Sword Emperor has improved a lot. This sword burial art is 100 times stronger than before. The golden-clad Emperor clicked his tongue in admiration. He didn't know if he could be immune to the sword burial art, but he was sure that it wouldn't be easy to defeat the White Bone Sword Emperor. Soon, it was the golden-clad Emperor's turn. The golden-clad Emperor's golden staff art was extremely domineering. He was like a golden god of war, and he smashed his opponent into meat paste with a few strikes. Next, Yi Chen also saw the strength of Dugu Ju, Dantai Mingyu, and Chu Zhongtian. What astonished Yi Chen was Arju. Arju's top 10 martial Dao required 10 supreme martial arts to be unleashed to the extreme. However, if there really were 10 supreme martial arts, even Yi Chen wouldn't dare to say that he could easily win. Currently, Arju had grasped 4 supreme martial arts. When the 4 martial Dao phantoms appeared, a quasi-sovereign ranked 39th on the quasi-sovereign list exploded. Yi Chen, your girlfriend is in danger this time. Don't you want her to forfeit? The golden-clad emperor said to Yi Chen. Yi Chen frowned slightly, but he didn't say anything. Xu Jing's opponent was the Green Man race's Berserk Emperor, who was ranked 26th on the quasi-sovereign list. In the entire universe, the quasi-sovereign list was very realistic. Other than some old monsters who hadn't appeared for a long time and newcomers in recent years, all the peak quasi-sovereigns were listed. Being ranked 26th proved that the Green Man race's Berserk Emperor's reputation wasn't undeserved. After all, the golden-clad emperor was only ranked 24th. However, Yi Chen knew that sometimes, he couldn't make decisions for Xu Jing. She still had to rely on herself. The golden dragon of the dragon race must taste delicious. The Berserk Emperor was extremely tall. Standing there, he resembled a Hulk. His muscles gave off an indestructible feeling, and his eyes were filled with savagery and savagery. Compared to the Berserk Emperor, Xu Jing's figure was extremely petite, forming a stark contrast. The Berserk Emperor has eaten the meat of the silver dragon and bronze dragon. He can't be thinking of eating his opponent raw in the arena, right? That might not be the case. He's a lunatic. In the Green Man race's camp, a few quasi-sovereigns discussed maliciously. Hearing the other party's words, Xu Jing didn't get angry. However, her eyes gradually turned bright gold. Whoosh! With a flash, Xu Jing pounced at the Berserk Emperor. Powerful earth energy extended far behind her, eventually turning into a draconic earth energy. A dragon roamed Taishu, and its head was nowhere to be seen. In the blink of an eye, the Berserk Emperor's surroundings were filled with divine dragons. Time and space seemed to have turned into water. Supreme ultimate skill of the flying dragon race, Flying Dragon Taishu. Child's play. Watch my 10 directions cloud movement. The Mad Emperor roared, and the surrounding space started to warp and collapse. It was to the point that the area where Xu Jing could move became smaller and smaller, and she felt like her hands and feet were tied up. Heaven-warring godly fist, lose. The Berserk Emperor couldn't do anything when the dragon was in the sea. However, if the dragon was trapped in the swamp, the Berserk Emperor would have a way to deal with it. He locked onto Xu Jing's figure and punched out with a red fist. Boom! At the critical moment, Xu Jing blocked the red fist with her dragon prajna palm. However, she was also knocked out of the space-time continuum. Striding forward, the Berserk Emperor arrived in front of Xu Jing in 3 steps. Raising his green palm, it became bigger than a mountain, wanting to imprison Xu Jing. This was another ultimate skill of the Berserk Emperor, Heaven-binding hand. The Heaven-binding hand's space-time transformation was no weaker than the 10 directions cloud movement. As long as one was trapped by it, they would be like a bird in a cage or a beast in a zoo. No one could escape. Xu Jing's current situation was no better than a bird in a cage. She was having difficulty breathing. Seeing this, Yi Chen gripped the armrest tightly and leaned forward slightly. A terrifying aura was suppressed in his body, like a volcano that was about to erupt. The Gold Robe Emperor, who was at the side, was worried about Xu Jing. But when he felt Yi Chen's aura, he couldn't help but shiver. It was too terrifying. He even suspected that there was a primordial ferocious beast hiding inside Yi Chen's body. Chapter 1275. Naturally, the Mad King could not sense Yi Chen's terrifying aura. With the protection of the Sharaba's rules, he was not worried that anyone would barge in. At that moment, all he could see was Xu Jing, who was struggling like a cornered beast. The heaven-binding hand tightened, and the Mad King could almost see Xu Jing being crushed. Roar! All of a sudden, a resounding dragon's roar erupted. The dazzling golden light seemed as though it was about to tear apart the heavens and earth. In the next instant, a slender and delicate fist that was filled with a domineering aura blasted out. As the golden fist pushed forward, space-time distorted. The space-time force field created by the heaven-binding hand crumbled. It was as though this golden fist had the power to pierce through everything. Sacred Dragon Fist. Furthermore, It was not the rank 8 Sacred Dragon Fist. It was also not an ordinary rank 9 Sacred Dragon Fist. It was the mid-rank 9 Sacred Dragon Fist. The peak of the Sacred Dragon Fist was only slightly weaker than a true consummate supreme martial art. The Sacred Dragon Fist was still very far from the peak of the 9th step, but below the supreme being level, who could cultivate a supreme martial art to perfection? Even Yi Chen was far from being able to do it. He could only gradually approach it. Therefore, the might of the Sacred Dragon Fist was evident. After punching through the Berserk Emperor's heaven-binding hand, Xu Jing's hair turned golden. She took a step forward, and a formless power congealed beneath her feet to form a golden cloud that carried her forward. Boom! A second mid-level level 9 Saint Dragon Fist was unleashed, and spacetime itself was dyed golden. Heaven battling divine fist. The Berserk Emperor roared as he punched out with his red fist. Boom! The terrifying explosion distorted spacetime, and some spacetime laws shattered. Ordinary quasi-sovereigns would be torn apart by the spacetime storm if they got close to the explosion. This was a battle between peak quasi-sovereigns. Ta-ta-ta. The Mad Emperor retreated 3 steps, as if he was no match for Xu Jing's Sacred Dragon Fist. Impossible, heaven-battling godly fist. The Berserk Emperor refused to give up, and without hesitation, he attacked once more. This time, the Mad King retreated a total of 7 steps. The third time, 100 steps. For the 4th time, he was sent flying, blood spurting from his mouth. What a reversal. The crazy emperor is actually no match for this woman. That should be a mid-tier rank 9 Saint Dragon Fist. It is normal for the Mad Emperor to lose. I wonder how the Mad King is going to deal with this. If that's all he's got, he'll definitely be beaten to death. There was a lot of discussion among the audience. Bastard. Don't underestimate me. The Berserk Emperor was thoroughly enraged. Xu Jing's comeback had been completely unexpected, but he would not allow himself to be defeated just like that. You no longer have a chance. Strands of golden aura emanated from Xu Jing's body. Under the pressure of the Berserk Emperor, she had broken through her limits. The Sacred Dragon Fist was different from a supreme martial art. With every increase in level, one would have a new understanding of the use of power. At this moment, even if Xu Jing did not use the Sacred Dragon Fist, she would still be many times stronger than before. This was because she could use the limited power to unleash even more power. Cloud movement of all directions. The crazed emperor's hand slammed out towards Xu Jing, causing spacetime to distort and collapse. Swish 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 swish. Once again, Xu Jing used her Taishu movement skill. Now that the Soaring Dragon Taishu movement skill was so powerful that the Crazy King's 10 Directions Cloud movement skill could no longer lock onto Xu Jing. Bang! With a twist of her body, Xu Jing appeared behind the Crazy King and punched him in the back. But that was not all. Dozens of Xu Jings appeared from all directions, and dozens of golden fists landed on the Crazy King. The Crazy King was like a hornet's nest. Intense golden light shot out from his body, and when the light reached its limit, the Crazy King's entire body exploded and turned into dust. The Crazy King, ranked 26th in the quasi-venerable ranking, was dead. Congratulations! Yi Chen from the Gold Yi dynasty laughed, his heart filled with envy. At their cultivation level, other than becoming stronger, they also wanted to find a powerful partner. It was only when Xu Jing won that Yi Chen heaved a sigh of relief. Who is that woman? She's so strong. If Xu Jing's appearance was already enough to make people's eyes light up, then Yang Qingxuan's appearance was even more shocking. Her opponent was not weak. On the contrary, he was very strong. He was an old monster from the demons, but he could not even take 3 moves from Yang Qingxian. Gradually, the number of people in the audience dropped to around 500. Murong Qingcheng had already forfeited once. In the wrestling ring, Yi Chen was facing off against a swordsman. This person was Sevenju Swordsman, ranked 27th on the quasi-venerable list. Like Yi Chen, he was from the human race. Maybe I'm not your opponent, but I will not forfeit. As a human, Sevenju Swordsman naturally knew that Yi Chen had obtained the title of Sword Emperor, and that he was not his opponent. Yi Chen said, "Then let's spar. Be careful." Seven-Jew swordsman did not dare to be careless. He immediately released his sword realm, Seven-Jew sword realm. He then waved his sword, and 7 beams of sword light flew towards Yi Chen. Yi Chen knew that this sword was not that simple. Sure enough, the 7 sword lights transformed in the air, turning from 7 to 49, then to 343. When they approached Yi Chen, the sword lights blotted out the sky and covered the earth. Each of them contained an extraordinary might, containing the mysteries of yin and yang extreme transformation. If an ordinary peak quasi-sun was not careful, they might be turned into a bloody pulp by the myriad of sword lights. In terms of changes, Yi Chen was more than 100 times stronger than Seven-Jew swordsman. Therefore, it was too easy for him to break this move. With a flick of his wrist, sword shadows filled the air, and all the sword lights were instantly cancelled out. Take my 7 hearts 7 despair myriad flower sword. The yin-yang profound sword art transformed into the space-time sword art. Seven-Jew swordsman suddenly disappeared, and sword lights rained down from all directions. Under the distortion of space-time, more sword lights were formed. Eventually, the billions of sword lights formed a barrier that enveloped Yi Chen. What a powerful sword art! Unfortunately, he encountered Yi Chen. The golden-clad emperor sighed inwardly. Seven-Jew swordsman was very strong. Although he was very confident in winning, it would not be too easy. There was a certain chance of a comeback. What a Seven-Jew myriad flower sword! Surprisingly, Yi Chen did not counterattack. Instead, he used the 5 elements sword art to defend. This was because he wanted to absorb the essence of the Seven-Jew myriad flower sword. He could not use it now, but it did not mean that he would not use it in the future. No matter how strange the Seven-Jew myriad flower sword was, it could not break Yi Chen's 5 elements sword art. If Seven-Jew swordsman knew that Yi Chen had only used 1% of the 5 elements sword art's power, who knew what he would think? Finally, the Seven-Jew myriad flower sword's momentum was exhausted. Seven-Jew swordsman sighed and put away his sword. As expected of the sword emperor. I did not lose unjustly. Let's spar again in the future. Yi Chen was looking forward to the Seven-Jew swordsman. He could feel that the Seven-Jew myriad flower sword was just a superficial skill. He hoped that the Seven-Jew myriad flower sword would be 100 times stronger next time. Definitely. Seven-Jew swordsman was a little surprised by Yi Chen's enthusiasm. Of course, he was happy. Being valued by the sword emperor meant that his sword art was worth watching. Yi Chen did not know that his words were very important to the human swordsman. Although Seven-Jew swordsman's achievements in the future could not be considered great, because of Yi Chen's words, he successfully stepped into the sovereign realm. Chapter 1276. After a month, the number of spectators had dropped to 100. Du Guju, Chu Zhongtian, Dantai Mingyu, and Murong Qingcheng were eliminated one by one. After all, they were still too young, unable to contend against these peak geniuses who had cultivated for thousands of years, or ancient freaks who had cultivated for nearly 100,000 years. It was not easy for them to reach this stage. Du Guju originally had a chance to go one step further, but unfortunately, he encountered the 13th-ranked quasi-sovereign, Yi Jianhuang of Yaksha race. Therefore, Du Guju, who had never feared death, chose to forfeit. After all, once the difference in strength was too great, there was no point in making a breakthrough. He wasn't afraid of death, but he wouldn't throw his life away either. The former lifeless blade artist and current lifeless blade emperor, Leng Feifen, was also eliminated. His luck was even worse than Du Guju's, as he was matched against the 5th-ranked quasi-sovereign, Four-Winged Dragon Emperor of Demons. Four-Winged Dragon Emperor's true form was a demonic dragon. Not only did he possess the powerful constitution of the dragon race, but he also possessed a comprehensive ability that was not inferior to anyone. Even some old freaks chose to forfeit, not to mention Leng Feifen. Including this time, Leng Feifen had forfeited 3 times. Previously, he was matched against Child Emperor of Evil Spirit Race and Wolf Emperor of Demons. When the number of people remaining reached 100, the Azura spring boiled, and each person obtained 10 drops of Azura spring water. It was not hard to imagine that after the battles, everyone's cultivation base would reach the limit of 8th layer life and death realm. In the near future, there would be a large number of supremes. Of course, the premise was that they couldn't die before the battles were over. It's getting more and more difficult. These old fellows have truly hidden themselves deeply. Golden-robed Emperor's expression was not as relaxed as before. None of the remaining 100 people were easy to provoke. They were either famous quasi-sovereigns or old freaks who had hidden themselves deeply. Some old freaks were the easiest to be vigilant against. After all, before knowing the opponent's strength, one would always want to give it a try. They would not easily forfeit. Among the old fellows, we have to pay attention to those 6. Yang Qingxian suddenly pointed at the 6 old fellows of each faction. Hey! The golden-robed emperor looked at Yang Qingxian in surprise, not knowing where her confidence came from. Yi Chen said, "It's not wrong to believe in her. Her mysterious path involves fate, so it shouldn't be difficult for her to see through a person's strength. Since that's the case, I'll trust you this once. I wonder, how many of those 6 old fellows do you think I will not be able to defeat?" The golden-clothed emperor asked. Yang Qingxian said, "The black-white old man and the yellow-robed old man are not your match. If you meet them, just forfeit immediately. As for the other 4, 3 of them are extremely dangerous. If you meet them, you will have to give it your all and even make some breakthroughs to defeat them. The last one is roughly on par with you. Of course, this is just a rough estimate." The golden-clothed emperor was about to say something, but his gaze was attracted by the situation in the arena. It turned out that a new round of fights had begun. On one side was the human purple-robed emperor, and on the other side was the unknown yellow-robed old man from the demons. Due to the rules of the Sharaba field, the audience couldn't hear what they were saying. The purple-robed emperor didn't know that the yellow-robed old man was extremely dangerous, so he didn't choose to forfeit. Yang Qingxian frowned. The yellow-robed old man was scarier than she had imagined. He seemed to have sensed that Yang Qingxian was talking about him, so he turned his head and looked at Yang Qingxian, revealing an unfathomable smile. Not good. The golden-clothed emperor wanted to warn the purple-robed emperor, but it was too late. He could only hope that Yang Qingxian was wrong. However, he trusted Yi Chen a lot. If Yi Chen said that Yang Qingxuan's mysterious path was very powerful, then it must be true. "Young man, this old man doesn't want to kill people. Unfortunately, if I don't kill you today, who knows how many of my people you will kill in the future," the yellow-robed old man said to the purple-robed emperor. The purple-robed emperor frowned. He had a bad feeling in his heart. This yellow-robed old man didn't seem simple, but he had never seen or heard of him before. "Who are you?" the purple-robed emperor asked. "I'm just a fisherman by the river of fate." The yellow-robed old man shook his head, not wanting to say more. "You're just trying to be mysterious. Take this," the purple-robed emperor shouted. He waved the purple fan in his hand, causing time and space to distort, turning into a sky-covering fan shadow that swept towards the yellow-robed old man. Buzz! The time and space rippled like water. The yellow-robed old man's body was like a reflection in the water, shaking along with the ripples, becoming blurry. However, when the fan shadow disappeared, the purple-robed emperor's pupils shrank. His opponent didn't even try to dodge, and actually dodged his ultimate move. What kind of movement skill was that? The purple-robed emperor is in danger. Yi Chen sucked in a deep breath. Ever since he started cultivating, this was the first time he had seen someone with such a deep comprehension of time profound. At least 50%, no, it might have reached 60%. Time and space revolution. The purple-robed emperor was the purple-robed emperor after all. Since he had decided to fight, he wouldn't back down. Pushing his Jin Yuan to the limit, the purple-robed emperor instantly turned into 4 human figures. The 4 figures waved their purple fans, and instantly, a purple whirlwind wrapped around the yellow-robed old man. The powerful spinning power combined with the yin and yang profound was enough to reverse time and space. The yellow-robed old man still didn't try to dodge. His lips moved slightly as he started chanting. Hearing the yellow-robed old man's chanting, the entire crowd went silent. Everyone seemed to see their own reflections in the river of fate. Chanting of fate, it's the demons' Lick Emperor. An uproar broke out on the human side. Lick was a terrifying bloodline. The curse of being unable to become a supremacy for the rest of their lives allowed them to obtain heaven-defying strength. However, the Lick bloodline rarely left the demon realm and rarely appeared in front of people. According to records, a peak Lick Emperor was invincible below the supremacy level. Only the legendary Great Demon King bloodline could suppress one. So this old guy is a Lick Emperor. No wonder. In the evil spirit and yaksha camps, some people curled their lips, looking fearful. Anyone who heard the name Lick Emperor would be extremely careful. Even the evil Sword Emperor, who was ranked 4th on the quasi-venerable list, opened his eyes and glanced at the yellow-robed old man. As the chanting sounded, the purple whirlwind froze. The yellow-robed old man gently pushed the purple whirlwind aside and walked toward the purple-robed emperor step by step. The purple-robed emperor wanted to move, but in front of the chanting of fate, he couldn't even move a finger. In the end, the yellow-robed old man pointed at the purple-robed emperor's forehead. The vitality in his eyes dissipated, and the purple-robed emperor's aura disappeared. The Lick Emperor is still so abnormal. The four-winged dragon emperor sighed. The Lick bloodline was very mysterious even among the demons. The more abnormal one's family is, the better. The Sky Demon Emperor, who was ranked 2nd on the quasi-venerable list, grinned. The purple-robed emperor is dead. The golden-robed emperor, who was beside Yi Chen, muttered. Yi Chen comforted the golden-robed emperor. He knew that the purple-robed emperor had a good relationship with the purple-robed emperor. The purple-robed emperor's death was a big blow to him. Yi Chen turned his head and glanced at the yellow-robed old man, who had returned to the spectator stands. He shook his head. Once a fisherman by the river of fate entered the river, he would no longer be able to see fate clearly. The muddy river would drown and devour him. You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.